This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo's here.
Exactly.
Thought maybe it was a 4-day work week for her, but big day. Everybody's summertime here. Futures -7. We're very Apple awaiting. Mark Gurman to join us. Anurag Rana to join us. This is later in the show.
Yep.
All things Apple. I guess it's going to be a very EIEIAIO.
I guess so. I mean, Apple, their big developer conference here, and I think a lot of folks are just looking for, some greater guidance from Apple about how they plan to participate in this whole AI extravaganza that's out there. Because quite frankly, the stock really hasn't been an AI story yet. And the question is, does it
turn it on to the end of the year and catch up with everything else? And the Magnificent Seven, the other thing, well, we're looking at many things this morning. We'll get to Europe in a moment. But to me, the big issue here is the inflation Fed story on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And what does it do to this market that just keeps going? The VIX, 13.16. Over the weekend, Paul, I discovered it's a bull market. It
is. It's a bull market. We have a little bit of red on the screen here, but I think this market generally is looking at an environment where rates are probably going to be coming down at some point. It's probably later than we all anticipated, maybe not as much as we anticipated. Earnings, pretty solid, so not a bad backdrop.
Euro, 5 standard deviation move from +2 standard deviation down to an exact 3 standard deviation weakness this morning, and that off the shock in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. So we have the euro 1.0738 off about a half of 1%.
Can you imagine? What's it like? You have a state dinner.
Yeah.
You show up, you get the good china out for President and Mrs. Biden.
Sure.
And then boom, there's your election results.
Yeah, is calling for snap elections there in Paris after some of the EU voting that we saw recently. So again, some big moves in Europe as well.
Good morning in Montreal. Great Formula One this weekend. Rain did it well. I thought the Formula One in Montreal was great. Good morning on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Good morning on Apple CarPlay, particularly across Europe this morning.
Yep.
Really touch upon the shock of what we see there and what it means for the American election. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, and we have futures lower, and this is after a higher than expected jobs report pulled stocks lower Friday. The data pushing investors to feel like the Fed, they might keep rates higher for longer. We will find out this week. Policymakers announced their decision on Wednesday. That same morning, we'll also get a CPI print. So we have NASDAQ futures, little change, down 14 points. We have Dow futures down about 0.2%, down 86 points. S&P futures down 0.1%, down 6 points. We'll head over to the bond market. We have the 2-year yield at 4.89%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%, and that's up 2 basis points. European elections having an impact on the euro right now, down about 0.5% at 107.38 against the dollar. The dollar edging higher. And yes, all eyes on Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference today. You talked about it. The company is expected to lay out this vision for artificial intelligence. Apple shares right now up about 0.1%. This week, the Tesla board, they'll be taking another vote on whether to give Elon Musk a $56 billion pay package. We have Tesla shares down 0.2%. And finally, NVIDIA begins trading today after its 10-for-1 stock split takes effect. Shares down 0.2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. From the Interactive Broker Studios, we begin strong with Eric Winograd with Alliance Bernstein, their chief economist. Eric, so many distractions right now. But taking the past economic data, the huge debate over the Friday unemployment studies, the 2 studies, and then looking forward to inflation and Fed, you notice that, quote unquote, the paycheck increases. How rich does Lisa Mateo feel?
Well, if she's doing things right and if you guys are paying right, then she should feel...
Got that right.
A lot of ifs there, Lisa.
A lot of ifs.
A lot of ifs. You can't talk to an economist and not get some ifs, right? Look, the household paycheck in aggregate, in real terms, so adjusted for inflation, is growing at about the same rate now that it was pre-pandemic, right? Real aggregate household paychecks are growing at around 1.5% or 2% on an annual basis. There's still sticker shock because prices are a lot higher, but the growth rate of the paycheck is keeping up with that and a little bit more right now. again, in aggregate, there are some households that are doing better. You talked about Elon Musk's pay package. I suspect that would make him do a little bit better, and some that are doing worse. But across the economy as a whole, households are keeping up right now.
So, Eric, given that backdrop here, what can our Federal Reserve really do? We'll get some CPI data on Wednesday, and that'll certainly be informative to the Fed. But, I mean, there seems like a pretty strong argument that they can just sit on the sidelines and let everything play out. What do you think?
Yeah, you got it right. I think that's exactly what they can do. And I don't think anyone expects them to move rates this week. They're comfortably on hold for the time being. There are cross currents in the data. The payrolls report on Friday was confusing. It's not clear how quickly inflation is going to come down and how far it's going to come down. And so the best thing for them to do is to sort of sit it out and wait and see. They're not in a rush. They don't have to be. The economy is performing well enough and inflation is coming down slowly enough that they can just wait a few more months. From a market perspective, I think that as long as the Fed is clear that they still expect the next move to be a cut whenever it comes, that's a lot more important than whether it's July or September or December or what have you. It's the what, not the when, that matters.
Yep. So, Eric, one of the areas that the Fed certainly pays attention to is the labor market here. And it seems like, I don't know, the labor market's still in, remarkably good shape here. How do you think about this U.S. labor market, in terms of jobs and wages and so on?
Yeah, it is remarkably resilient, given the tightening that we've seen and given all the different cross currents and the frictions in the global economy. The labor market is still quite strong. And, we can debate perhaps how strong it really is, but it is the key underpinning of what still looks very much like a soft landing. You could do 90% of my job as an economist by just remembering that if American households have money, they'll spend it. And right now, the labor market is generating money for households. And as long as that's the case, a soft landing still seems most likely.
Eric, to go back to your Dartmouth education, where politics is always folded into economics, this European election wasn't about inflation. It was a primal scream. Migration, and the phrase that's used in Europe is green. I'll let folks decide what they think that means. Do you think your area of inflation will actually be a political item in America in November? Or are we going to be overwhelmed by social and cultural debates like what we witnessed this weekend in Europe?
I think I think they're related, to be honest with you. I think that the underpinning of a lot of what's going on a political level right now is populism. There are large portions of the population in the U.S., as there are around the world, who don't feel like the existing system represents them. And they could view, depending on your perspective, they could view the rise in prices as part of that. They could view people like me sitting here saying, oh, in aggregate, households are keeping pace with it. And, not every household is. And so when people have these sort of populist impulses, it can take a lot of different forms. And certainly nativist sentiment is part of that. A need for economic growth and a need to keep people employed is part of that, but it is unpredictable fundamentally. And, it can take a lot of different paths, but I see all of these issues as being related.
We don't play the parlor game here, but let's play it right now. Did you change your Fed call off of the jobs report Friday?
No, our longstanding call has been that the Fed will cut rates once this year, with December the most likely month. And we're still there.
Wow. See that's like, that's the buy side. It's different. He's not making, TV appointments.
Right, exactly.
Eric, really appreciated, acclaimed with Alliance Bernstein, of the Dartmouth bubble as well. Their chief economist at Alliance Bernstein. Futures at -7, the VIX out of stick, 13.14 off a huge bull market week last week. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. After a crushing defeat in the European Parliament elections, French President Emmanuel Macron is plunging his country into new political uncertainty. He's called a snap legislative election that pits him once again against his perennial far-right rival, Marine Le Pen. Bloomberg's Colleen Conan has the latest from Paris.
What Macron decided to do last night was a bigger shock in response to a shock, which was this large victory of the National Rally of Jordan Bardella in this European election. 32% yesterday, more than double the score of his own party, Renew Europe, with candidate Valérie Ayé, who has been struggling to exist in this European elections campaign.
Bloomberg's Caroline Conan in Paris reports the election won't affect Macron's position as France's head of state. Centrist Benny Gantz resigned from Israel's emergency government and called for elections, criticizing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the war against Hamas. The move does not immediately pose a threat to Netanyahu, who still controls a majority coalition in parliament. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Cairo for the start of his Mideast tour. He will push for the U.S. ceasefire plan. Former President Donald Trump is expected to have his probation interview today following his criminal conviction on falsifying business records. Finally, Caitlin Clark snubbed. The WNBA rookie will not join Team USA for the Olympic Games in Paris. The Indiana Fever guard did not make the roster despite having set several NCAA records her senior year as a Iowa Hawkeye. Clark says it's the most competitive team in the world.
Honestly, no disappointment. I think it just gives you something to work for. That's a dream. Hopefully one day I can be there, and I think it's just a little more motivation.
Clark says she hopes to take part in the next Summer Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg Tom Paul Lisa.
We go to Surveillance Indy 500 correspondent Michael Barr. Michael Barr, I had so much fun watching rain, the no rain at Montreal.
See the strategy there?
Do we have to pray for rain for every race to slow the cars down where the skill of the drivers actually matters?
Yeah, see, now, and I got to explain this to everybody. It's like, people say, well, why did you just keep the rain tires on the car for the whole race? No, you can't do that.
Can't do this
because it's a rule, and plus the tires will heat up, and then you got a problem. So you have to change, and I love that strategy part of it.
I just think the sport is so messed up. It's so, for Bloomberg Business of Sports, it's boring, and rain made it so exciting. Verstappen won, and Max Verstappen
But doesn't he win every race?
Yes,
Is that not a problem in and of itself?
Yes, he does.
Isn't that a problem?
I'm speaking as an amateur. Farrell would give you all the details.
Okay.
But the bottom line is when you're looking out his itty-bitty camera where he's in the driver's seat, it's not the same as other drivers. He's so smooth. Even a hack like me can tell that Max Verstappen is different than all of them. But it was great, Lando. I'm sorry, Indianapolis 500, rain. Maybe Kentucky Derby, rain.
No, see, you can't run the rain in the Indy 500.
Okay. How about you two? Good morning, Thailand. Good afternoon, Thailand, I should say. Thank you for listening. Paul, how about this one? This is somebody next door to Paul.
Okay.
Good morning from the Jersey Shore.
There you
Beautiful
go.
sunrise. What are you doing here?
Exactly. I did see the sunrise on my little ride in today, but that's about as close as I'll get.
We'll
be on the beach at 3 o'clock today.
On the beach at 3 o'clock. Life is tough. We say good morning to all of you. The social that we're doing, we're just absolutely humbled out on LinkedIn and Twitter, particularly Lisa Mateo's effort there. Did you go to Costco this weekend?
I did not go to Costco. I was stuck
Next
in a
weekend.
softball field all weekend.
All weekend.
Yeah, big daughter player. Yeah.
How did the offspring do in the softball?
She did well. Yeah,
Okay.
she did well.
Yeah.
Very
Okay.
impressed with her. So it was nice.
They should have had rain. But anyways, we're here. Apple CarPlay is the way to hear us in 20 countries across this nation. I assume they're announcing a new Apple CarPlay today at this Apple thing. Android, good morning as well. YouTube, humbled by it. Search Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. That's building out nicely. Truly worldwide. Really humbled again by that. On the data front, Brent crude 79.85, a big deal. Brent back up to an 80 print would be something. Gold can't get out of its way. 23.17 on gold. VIX 13.14. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities with no markups or built-in spreads and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. To the markets we go, where futures lower as we focus shifts to inflation data. Federal Reserve meeting on interest rates. Policymakers, they'll announce their decision on Wednesday. Their forecast to keep borrowing costs at 2-decade high. Over to futures, we'll give you the breakdown. NASDAQ futures, little change, down 10 points. Dow futures down about 0.1%, 67 points. S&P futures down 0.1%, down 5 points. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.89%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.46%, that's up 2 basis points. Moving the markets, we have Moderna up more than 1%. They said its combination flu and COVID shot, it met the goals of a key late-stage trial. Then we go to Southwest Airlines, up 7%. The Wall Street Journal reported Elliott Investment Management has built an almost $2 billion stake in the carrier. And since we're talking airlines, well, travel's booming. Jets are burning fuel like it's 2019. According to Bloomberg NEF, about 10.5 million flights set to crisscross the skies in the third quarter. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
There was a point in the pandemic where I looked up in the sky from the lovely place I live, and there were no planes in the sky.
Yep.
I counted 9 planes a couple days ago.
Oh, wow.
9, going here, going there. One of them probably going to Brussels, where Steve Carroll is. But, it's just amazing how that changed. He holds one of the most impressive, prestigious degrees on the continent, and that is comparative politics from the London School of Economics. The star of Bloomberg Radio in London, Stephen Carroll, in Brussels this morning. Stephen, Americans are clumsy on all this EU chit-chat. I think there's been a lot of misreporting. Walk through where Mr. Macron will be July 8th. Is he going to open the Olympics?
Yeah, he's going to be there no matter what happens. And that kind of explains part of this gamble that Emmanuel Macron is taking by calling this snap election for the Legislative Chamber, for the National Assembly in Paris. It's an interesting move because actually the results from the European elections in France weren't that far off what opinion polls were expecting. Macron's party got just under 15% of the vote, and the far right party led by Marine Le Pen got 32%. So that was pretty much as the polls had predicted. But what Emmanuel Macron did in response was call this election. Essentially, he's saying to the electorate, if you want to vote for this party, if you want to see them govern, let's give it a go. But he's doing that with an idea that he'll still be president.
My amateur take on this is the correlation of voting intent from the EU 720 parliament seat election over to actual national elections is not very tight. Do I have that right?
You do. We talk about the European elections being second-order elections because people tend to vote a bit more to the extremes. There's a lot of protest voting that can go on. There's a lot of a question of people saying, oh, well, I'm angry with the government, so I'm going to use this as a protest vote. It's a bit like a midterm for a lot of countries. And if you look at how it played out in France and Germany, that was definitely the case because the governments there both got a kicking. Then look at Italy, where Giorgia Meloni's party did very well, massively increased their score in Parliament too. That was an endorsement of her leadership. And then you've got the ones in between, the likes of Spain, where you have Pedro Sanchez's party coming in, just having lost 1 seat, a pretty respectable showing from his party.
So, Stephen, I think, a lot of folks here in the U.S. were unsure why Mr. Macron is calling these elections because he doesn't have to. I mean, he's got a couple of years, right? So what's the political calculus here?
So, Emmanuel Macron, the next presidential election is in 2027. He can't run. He's done his 2 terms, right? So he's term blocked out. So he is looking at Marine Le Pen potentially being in the lead for the next presidential election. How, in a political calculation from his point of view, can he try to damage Marine Le Pen's party? They've never been in power in France. They've been doing very well in the polls. But as we all know, when you actually get into power, things look very different. So this is a chance to create, using the wonderful French political idea of cohabitation. We have a president from one party and a prime minister from another. Takes you back to 1997, the last time we had it. Jacques Chirac did it. In a similar sort of gamble, right? He called a snap election, it backfired, and he ended up having to cohabit, which all we know, cohabiting can go really well or really badly, depending on who you're living with. So this is the way of Emmanuel Macron testing that out. Maybe that's just my experience, I don't know. But testing that out in his political sphere by saying that if the National Rally, the far-right party, can get a majority in Parliament and that Marine Le Pen can become Prime Minister, then the French people can see what they look like in power.
Is this the Dr. Stephen interview? Is that
It might be.
He's helping us here with cohabitation.
Stephen, how does all this play out in the UK these days, post-Brexit?
I mean, look, it was funny, I was around the European Parliament last night talking to some of the political leaders, getting opinions about where things go next in Europe. One of the things that has changed since the UK left is that nobody else is talking about leaving. All those other parties that used to campaign, like Nigel Farage did in the UK, to leave the European Union, they've dropped that idea because they saw how it went. What it does open the door to, if we look at the broader picture out of the European election, actually the broader story, set aside France and Germany, is that the centre held in these elections. You know, the centre-right, centre-left and liberals, centrists as we call them, would be able to govern together. I realise that has a different meaning in the US, so I correct myself. Centrist is a safer word to use. But look, those parties together can still govern after this election. They still have a majority. So that bodes well for a potential change of government in the UK if they're looking for warmer relations, because these are people who traditionally would have had good links with the parties, with the Labour Party in the UK, for example, who are leading in the polls.
Stephen, we were blowing up the show yesterday afternoon off these huge headlines from Europe, and you're the first name I mentioned. You've got the LSE Comparative Politics. You were journalist in residence at Stigler at the Booth School in Chicago. You're hugely transatlantic qualified. Can all that we see in Europe here, the primal scream on migration and green, do you see that transferring over to America in Trump, Biden, Biden, Trump?
I mean, look, that makes for a very complicated election. The systems are so different that I think it's, you know, a question of how you compare the points you can compare on. And the main thing that people are worried about everywhere is how they pay their bills, is the cost of living. And that's been the number one issue in this election that fed into some of the concerns around migration, because those are very closely linked to housing. Can that map onto the US? You're a better place to tell me than me.
Stephen Carroll, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. From Brussels, of course, with Bloomberg Radio holding court in London each and every day. Paul, I went to Paramount. I looked for the headlines from the weekend.
Yeah, you didn't.
There weren't any.
There weren't any.
That's all there is to it.
No, and that tells you all you need to know.
What are they waiting for?
I mean, you think about CBS, Viacom, the Paramount Studio. I mean, three crown jewels of American entertainment and media. You can't give it away these days, literally. You finally have the control shareholder, Sherry Redstone, the daughter of Sumner Redstone, saying, I'm ready to sell, and that's been months, and there's been no buyers, and certainly no credible buyers, in my opinion. And I define a credible buyer as a significant global media company or a significant private equity consortium, and we haven't seen either of those come to the fore here. So, and that's kind of what you're seeing in the stock here, just not a lot of movement.
China box office, Patrick Brzezinski. This is from the Hollywood Reporter.
I like them.
Furiosa and Civil War both fizzle. Yeah. How about that next Barbie and Oppenheimer?
Yeah, exactly. So, you need some big box office, and so we'll see there's going to be some big titles coming later this summer. But really, Hollywood's hanging its shingle on 2025. That's when everything kind of got deferred because of the writer's strike and the actor's strike.
So they're waiting for what? Christmas of this year?
Well, this summer will be big, but really, 2025 is when a lot of the big sequels, of which there's a million franchises, they've been pushed off to 2025, late 2024.
Did you see the heartfelt emotion out on social this weekend? A road collapsed near Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
I
going to be
got
an issue
so
for our
many.
friends out there.
I got so many comments about it, and the thing is, when Bramo went, it changed. Before Bramo, we had a covered wagon to get us to Jackson Hole. Yeah. And now we just come out of the airport on a Sikorsky to get there. Yep. So, it's...
Exactly.
But thank you for the many emails. It's very serious for the employees of Jackson Hole. Many of them come from Idaho. And that road just destroyed over the weekend. Futures -4. The VIX 13.11. Euro weaker. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Red on the screen, but little movement in futures. Right now, NASDAQ futures, little change, down about 6 points. Dow futures, down about 0.1%, 46 points. S&P futures, little change, down about 3 points. This all comes before a report on consumer prices Wednesday morning, followed by a decision by the Fed on interest rates that afternoon. RBC said there's a risk of an 8% slump in the S&P 500 if the Fed fails to cut rates this year. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield, 4.89%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%, and that's up 3 basis points. Over to commodities right now, we have spot gold higher at $2,298 an ounce. Brent crude, $79 a barrel. WTI crude, $75 a barrel. What's moving the markets? A chip maker, Advanced Micro Devices, down 2%. The reason why? Morgan Stanley downgrades the company to equal weight from overweight, saying investor expectations for its AI business seem too too high. And then you have CrowdStrike, GoDaddy, KKR, shares on the rise. It was confirmed the stocks would join the S&P 500 index in the latest quarterly weighting change. So we have CrowdStrike up 5%, GoDaddy up 3%, KKR up 8%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul, what is it, London School of Economics Monday?
I know.
We were only talking to people. A couple weeks ago, we only had people from Colby College.
Yes, that's right.
Today is London
Strong
School
Maine.
of Economics. Jenna Wee joins us, first class honors from LSE years ago in their core economics. That's enough to say anything about her. Head of Market Analysis, RBC Bruin Dolphin. Janet, I'm absolutely fascinated if the markets are disassociated, delinked from Fed chit-chat. It sure feels that way. Are the markets going their own and separate way?
Hi, good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me. I think there are a lot of factors to depend on. I think Fed is very important, obviously, but at the same time, we've also got a resilience in the U.S. economy, in the job market, and I think most importantly, the latest earnings season suggests that corporate fundamentals are still very well, and especially the mega cap tech stocks exposed to AI themes. I think this is very important for investors. So Fed is important, but as long as we have other positive factors, it is fine for markets to grind higher.
And not a small matter, Paul. Over Thursday, Friday, the Atlanta GDP now statistic, which is coming down, rebounded to like a 3-ish.
Okay.
I'm not going to give you any decimal points. It's 3-ish.
Yeah, on a Monday, that's good enough for us. So, Janet, as we step back and think about where we want to allocate capital, are there parts of the world that you guys at RBC like better than others? U.S., Europe, Asia? How do you guys think about that?
We currently favor the U.S. We have a long-term overweight on the U.S. equity market, primarily because we think that corporate America is just attractive. We know that it is relatively more expensive than other regions, but we think that the growth outlook and the profit margins really justify that. So we have more overweight on U.S. equities, and we particularly like the semiconductor sectors. And we also recently upgraded UK equities to a modest overweight because we do want some defensive areas to actually act as a hedge to our overweighted US equity. So in terms of regional allocations, it's really the UK and the US. For the other regions, we're just neutral.
How about on the fixed income side, Janet? I mean, a lot of folks are making the argument they can sit there in a 2-year treasury at close to 5%. How do you think about the fixed income opportunities out there?
I think short-term duration is still attractive. I think we would be a bit more cautious on adding to fixed income of longer maturity at this stage. I think if our view of the soft landing is going to materialize, I do think that the extent of the fall in bond yields is going to be pretty limited. So I really don't see a rally in the bond market developing in the near term. So in terms of fixed income, I think we are just modestly overweight. I think primarily really as a hedge to economic slowdown. That possibility is still there, but we're not particularly bullish on fixed income at this stage.
So no appetite to maybe take on some credit risk here? Because I look at over the last couple of years, it's been really tough in the fixed income markets, but high yields actually giving you some positive return. How do you think about taking credit risk here?
Yeah, I think to many people's surprise, corporate credit high yield has done really, really well. And we are at a stage where the spreads in corporate credit is just extremely tight. We actually don't really favor that. In fact, in our alternative segment, we have a short high yield position. Ooh, nice. Because we think that the risk reward is just not there. And I think the risk is actually quite asymmetric, as in there's a high risk of high yield spreads actually going up rather than down.
So I guess, one of the key issues continues to be what the central banks are going to do. And we've seen some of the European Central Bank cut rates, the Bank of Canada. What's your view of this U.S. Federal Reserve? Because there's a big split out there to what they should do, what they will do. How do you think about the U.S. Federal Reserve?
Our view is that there's just no urgency for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. I think at most they may be able to cut in the fourth quarter this year. But really, if you look at inflation data, it has made progress. There's no doubt about it. But if you look at some of the measures like the super core inflation and the services inflation, it's just really not there for the Fed to cut. It just doesn't give the confidence for the Fed, especially you see the wage growth is over 4%. I think that's a very key driver of the services inflation going forward. So I think, yeah, expect the Fed to just keep on hold for the near term.
Janet, your thoughts on the EU elections? My angle is to question, can it carry over across the Atlantic to the U.S. election as well? But your synthesis of what we saw over the weekend in Europe.
Yes, not immediately clear how that would carry over to the U.S. election. I think U.S. election a lot is about the domestic issue, but I think some of the areas of concerns actually resonate. For example, I think immigration and also green policy. And also, I think people are just generally giving this protest vote that they're not being represented well, and they're just, quite dissatisfied with the status quo.
Right.
So I think this is something to watch, and particularly on how that impacts on inflation and structural growth, given that immigration is a big topic, and also policies on potential future green investments.
Janet, thank you. Janet, with us for the RBC Bruin at Dauphin in London this morning. Paul, what's this summer look like for New York Wall Street with all of your contacts and experience? Is everybody grinding it out, making it 7 days a week? Or is everybody petrified they're going to slam forward rationalizations?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know is my answer.
Yeah, and I go with what we heard from some of the, the Jamie Dimons, the Mr. Moynihan's at B of A. Kind of, they're saying that their calendars look better, their backlog looks a little bit better.
Yeah.
We've seen a pretty healthy IPO market. There hasn't been a ton of deals, but there's been a fair number of deals, and they've generally performed well. And what I'm looking for is a private equity business, because a lot of these private equity firms have a lot of companies that they've owned, investments they've made, that they are long in the tooth. They've owned these things for 5, 7, 9, 10 years.
Yeah, and past 7 years is where it's painful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they need to see an exit here, either via IPO or a sale here, which bodes well for Wall Street. But we're just not seeing it. I think these high interest rates, it's going to take a while for buyers and sellers to get used to, and higher for longer.
To me, the overlay is, and I don't know how it fits in, there's a zeitgeist out there. There's X number of regional banks are going to go under. I don't want to predict that. Yeah. But the real estate thing just won't go. It won't go away.
No, and I saw that there's a good story over the weekend that I read that it's we're starting to see some trades happen in commercial real estate. And again, the discounts are meaningful, 30, 40, 50%, and for some major owners like Blackstone, for example. So, but this seems like it's going to be a multi-year issue from what I can tell for commercial real estate. Either you have to refinance it at way higher rates, or you have to exit at a much lower valuation.
Yeah, well, we'll continue to follow that. Some really good sites out on Twitter to follow property by property, some of these markdowns, as they say. Futures improve. We were -9, we're now -4. The VIX 13.11, and the yield space, 2-year yield, is a 4.90%. That gets my attention. 10-year yield, 4.47% as well. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Far-right parties rattle the traditional powers in the European Union with major gains in parliamentary seats, dealing an especially humiliating defeat to French President Emmanuel Macron, who called for snap legislative elections. France's far-right National Party showed gains in polls against Macron's pro-European Renaissance Party in the EU's parliamentary election. Shannon Saban was a Renaissance candidate for the European Parliament.
French President Emmanuel Macron is someone who is really brave, and that has always decided, when he was president and when he is president, to speak with French people and to answer their worries and so on.
The election in France will take place over 2 rounds beginning June 30th. Benny Gantz resigned from Israel's emergency government and called for elections, criticizing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the war against Hamas. Former President Donald Trump zeroed in on his criminal conviction, and prosecutors at a campaign rally in sweltering heat in Las Vegas Sunday afternoon. At least 6 people were hospitalized. Dozens needed medical attention because of the heat. During his address, Trump denounced Nevada's Democratic senator who is up for re-election.
With your help, we're going to win Nevada. We're going to defeat your Biden-loving radical left Senator Jackie Rosen, who's terrible.
Today, Donald Trump will take part in his pre-sentencing interview with the New York Probation Department virtually from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. He was convicted of falsifying business records regarding hush money payments. The criminal trial of President Joe Biden's son is heading into its final stretch. Hunter Biden's lawyers could call at least one more witness when the case resumes today in Delaware's federal court. Biden himself. He is charged with 3 felonies stemming from the October 2018 purchase of a gun. Prosecutors say he lied on a mandatory gun purchase form by saying he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr, Paul Sweeney, and Tom Keene. Let's talk about it. The grocery store. They tell me inflation's ebbed
Right.
at the grocery store. And I'm getting to the end of the line, and I'm like, no, just that simple. I mean, what do you see out there? I mean, for everybody,
I'm referring to Lisa because she buys for.
worldwide.
Yeah, I'm seeing still with the prices higher. That's why I'm not going to push Costco again, but that's why I go to Costco. But some people also switching to the brand names.
That's
I know
what
you've
do.
done that.
Yep,
Yeah.
Signature and all. So, but packaged goods prices don't come down per se. That's what I've been told. But commodity prices, like the price of a banana,
correct,
or whatever, that's just going to fluctuate with the market, and maybe they're coming down. Who knows? Right. But certain things, once they go up, they don't come down, is what I understand.
Yeah.
So now we're just measuring the rate of inflation, I guess.
You know, my basic take on the whole inflation thing is just do the math, and the math is simple. The last number of years off the pandemic, there's been a huge level change in inflation. I think you're going to feature, Lisa, here in 5 minutes, this Bloomberg article about 26%.
How expensive it is
lift.
to keep a home.
I mean,
yes.
you're going to walk
crazy.
us through this, right?
Sure,
This is what Michael Barr's living.
Yeah, and it's a whole thing explaining why, what reasons, what places it raised the most, which is interesting too.
Yeah, Jenna, she just said, European elections, who cares? It's just about the election's just about inflation. I'm not sure.
The economy's stupid. I mean, we've heard that time and time again during the elections, and you can certainly make that case these days.
Lisa's got a really interesting newspaper segment coming up, and we're really going to drill into the housing story there as well. But please stay around for this. Some rich stories over the weekend. Futures again improving, negative 3.75 to put a bow on it. The VIX 13.12. What happened to Bitcoin? Is that your fault?
Yeah, absolutely. We got Bitcoin kind of steady here, 69,500. It's a pretty solid number there for Bitcoin.
$80 on Brent crude. Back up we go. We were looking at $69 West Texas Intermediate.
Right. Bring
it over to the global price, $80 right now on Brent crude. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have little movement in futures. The focus turns to the Federal Reserve policymakers updating their rates forecasts on Wednesday. Also, the release of inflation data for May. So we have NASDAQ futures, little change, down 10 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 59 points. S&P futures down 0.1%, or 5 points. We'll take you over to the bond market where we have the 2-year yield at 4.89%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%, and that's up 3 basis points. Commodities, spot gold higher at $2,300 an ounce. We have Brent crude at $80 a barrel. There you go. WTI crude at $76 a barrel. Companies making news. We'll start with Microsoft. Its Xbox division. They're announcing plans for new entries in the Doom, Gears of War franchises. And they said Call of Duty Black Ops 6 will be released as an online-only game later this year. Those shares up 0.1%. GameStop cutting back some of the losses it took on Friday after announcing plans to sell new shares. Shares are up more than 7%. And finally, if you haven't received that promotion, well, you're not alone. Just 1.3% of 68 million white-collar professionals in America were promoted in the first quarter, and that's the lowest proportion in data going back 5 years. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
You know, we do promotions every day here.
Oh, sure.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's something we can do. Did you see Torsten Slok this morning?
Yeah.
We get in a huge research dump, folks, starting about 7 p.m. Sunday, and it's everybody writing and, you know, and all that. And Torsten Slok, just it's a simple sentence. Car sales near where Sweeney lives, very strong.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it. U.S. Ward's Automotive car sales, they're not what they were before the pandemic, but they've really come back.
Talking about suggesting significant support to auto sales from wealth gains, Tom, for households via higher stock prices,
and
higher home prices,
and
higher cash flow. Yeah.
Friday, we saw the wealth stuff buried in the, you know, late Friday, I got to go to the beach news.
Yep.
But the answer is people, you know, to make a short story of it, if you own NVIDIA, you sell a portion and buy a car.
Right.
I mean, that's the mindset.
Yep. Or you take your interest income, Tom, off your 5-year treasury.
Are they leasing or are they buying?
I lease personally. I'm a leaser. I like to think even if I get a dent in my car, I'm like, it's a rental. If I get a scratch in my car, forget it. It's a rental. I don't worry about it.
I can't. I'm a financer. I have one that's paid off, one that's almost paid off. I am going to be golden.
This is because you're buying Wagyu at Costco.
Yep.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages on a Monday. It's brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with our next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. And thank you, Interactive Brokers, for your foundational support. Lisa Mateo.
Oh, let's get to the cost of owning a home, because this one is eye-opening. That's why it stood out to me. Increasing 26% since 2020. This is from Bankrate. Okay, it says because of different things, not even including the mortgage payment. We're talking about expenses, including taxes, insurance, utilities. They've all skyrocketed. So they crunched the numbers. It says the average of what homeowners shelling out annually for owning and maintaining, that's the big thing, a typical single-family home, totaled just over $18,000 in March. It's about $1,500 more a month than 4 years earlier, you know, during the pandemic. They got the figure. They factored in property taxes, home insurance, energy costs, all that kind of stuff. 2% of the sale price for maintenance. So the states with the biggest jump, Utah, Idaho, Hawaii.
Did you say Utah up 44%?
Utah is the top, followed by
44%.
Idaho. It's crazy. And then Alaska and Texas actually saw the smallest increases, but it just goes to show you how much it's costing to maintain the house, not even to afford, you know, the 7% mortgage or whatever that people are paying.
And there's a great chart in here. States where upkeep is typical, is priciest. The average in the United States is $18,000, $118 a year.
Yep.
But in Hawaii, it's $29,000. But our good friends in New Jersey, we come in as strong number 4 at $25,500.
Look at the New Jersey, New York differential. It's $3,000.
I know. Thank you.
It's that much more expensive.
That's how we roll in Jersey.
I'm shocked. John,
All right, Lisa.
John Tucker.
Yeah, John Tucker's his congestion report there.
I don't, Jennifer Epstein, thank you so much for writing that up. Really important story. And, I think there's a political tinge too. I look at the states, Hawaii, I think that's Democrat. In California, I think that's Democrat. But all the rest of the other states are Trump country. So it's going to be, it's going to fold right into that inflation angst. Very good. Next.
Gen Z, plumbers and construction workers who are Gen Z, they're making blue collar work cool again, okay? We're talking hashtag blue collar. It's attracting a lot of attention. The Wall Street Journal actually spoke with a female electrician. She has like 2.2 million followers, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. She posts everything she does every day, and she's getting stopped by people who are saying, you know what? You sparked my interest in this trade. I don't want to pay this high cost of a college degree. I don't want to be stuck with all this debt. I'm thinking of doing what you're doing. I want to be my own boss. Those are things that they're telling her. Vocational programs are on the rise. More people are joining them. And these people who are influencers at the same time, this girl is making $200,000 a year just from clicks on brand deals from like Carhartt and Klein Tools.
Cool.
That's just that alone. That's not even including her salary.
Are we influencers?
I don't think we're influencers.
Do you have 2.2 million followers?
Somebody can click.
Yeah. But I mean, I think you make it's totally correct. I mean, I think it's just the economics.
Correct.
Why take on that huge college debt when you're unsure of what the payoff will be, as opposed to some of these trades, which we know their demand.
Age-old.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, my friend has twins. One is going to college, one is doing the trade. So
is that right?
They split
Okay.
it, yeah.
Okay, very good.
All right, we'll check back with those twins in like 20 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Return on
Who's
investment.
doing better.
Right.
All right, be careful how you drive. I'm putting the warning out there because certain apps on your phone could be giving your car insurance company information that could affect how much you pay. This is from the New York Times. It's interesting. Some of these apps that are on your phone, they're giving this information. Apps that people use a lot, like the One Life 360 that parents use to keep track of their kids. That's a big one.
Do you use that? I've never heard of it.
Yes, it tracks everything. You can see like how fast they're driving on the highway.
I don't.
I do track my kids. I do.
But he's a soldier.
I know, but my daughter
track.
too. I got to find out where he is at all times.
But do they have to opt into it?
Yes.
Okay. See, all right.
We have the conversation,
Okay.
but then you have that Apple Find My Phone, which does it automatically too.
Right.
I mean, there's other options.
But
It's Mateo's household. I would not do well.
Crack down. But also, if you have the My Radar, I mean, it gives weather forecasts, but it's also giving this data on how you're driving to insurance companies. Gas Buddy, that gives you tips on gas. Things on how you slam on the brakes, how fast you're going, how much you're on your phone.
Really?
Yeah, and it's becoming an issue. I think Allstate was one of the companies, which was there's a feature provided by an analytics company that was founded by Allstate. So that's how they're getting a pick. But not all insurers use it. Geico, USAA, they say they don't use this, but just to keep you aware.
Okay, all right.
Be careful how you're driving.
Thank you. You got one more
Lisa
for us?
Mateo may be following us, Tom. I mean, for all we know,
I could be tracking you.
She could be tracking us.
You got one more? Is that it?
One more. A
One
big
more.
cricket tournament over the weekend. Long
Yes.
Island.
Unbelievable.
34,000 people packed that temporary stadium to watch the T20 Cricket World Cup. It was India versus Pakistan. India actually winning 119 to 113. But a lot of people flew in from out of town, paid big ticket prices. One guy paid $2,500 per ticket for him and his son to go to that game. But it was the largest attendance at an international cricket match in the U.S. And it's not over. There's 3 more matches in New York. We have the final one Wednesday between India and the United States.
I mean, and the
it was
United States beat Pakistan, was
Yes.
it?
Yes.
And
yes.
like, apparently that is just
That's like
unheard of.
That's like the White Sox beating the Red Sox this weekend.
Exactly.
I mean, but I've never seen a cricket match. Like, I don't know how they score it. I don't know.
Nobody does.
I'm
Nobody does.
interested to find out.
I have scientific knowledge on this. I was exhausted from a round-the-world trip for Bloomberg, and I'm in a hotel, brain dead, in London. And I turned cricket on, and I was too tired to look at the screen. It sounds just like baseball.
Yes.
Yeah.
It sounds just like the
Right.
audience sound is just like a sleepy July afternoon. It's a 6th inning. The kid wants a slush.
Right.
I want a Narragansett lager beer. It sounds the same, but I've tried and tried. I don't get it.
You don't get it.
I've tried. John Riding of Green Capitals helped me.
I can't.
I failed.
It apparently has
huge.
quite a following.
Billions watching.
Yes.
Yep.
The great video of the wonderful John Leventhal, who did the guitar on this, is out on YouTube. Mark Cohn, classic.
I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam, walking in Memphis. But do I really feel the way I feel?
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. Thrilled you're with us this morning. Distractions, many here across the political economics of Europe. Huge election news. We'll cover that across the next 2 hours as well. Its impact on the American political system. We've got the markets. We got Apple. What 3, 4?
I don't know.
Is there a countdown clock for Apple?
There should be, because I mean, expectations are pretty high, Tom. That they're going to talk to us about
I'll
AI.
go there. Yeah, absolutely.
AI, and we need to see if they're going to get some of that juice.
I wonder if Mr. Cook is a little upset over the built-up expectations.
Well,
He's,
I mean, I don't
trying to
know.
control it.
They always say they don't have to be first with a product or a service, but they need to be the best. So
Yeah.
we'll see if they can step up here.
Anurag Rana with us, and
Yep.
Mark Gurman will join us. He is the number
He's
one
pretty good
Apple
there.
watcher in the world. He is with Bloomberg News. He'll
Pretty
join
good.
us in early California morning as well. We've got a really important guest right now. We're going to get to it. This was futures -5. It's real simple. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Search for Bloomberg Podcasts. And Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by Cohn Resnick. Advisory, assurance, tax. See how business strategies from the world of golf can help your company build competitive advantage. Watch the Business of Golf series at cohnresnick.com/golf. COHNREZNICK. cohnresnick.com/golf. Thank you, Cohn Resnick, for your support. On Apple CarPlay, and particularly good morning in Europe. It is a Europe that's been shocked in the last 24 hours. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, and a quick shout out over to Dan, who says Max Mateo with the heavy surveillance on the family.
Oh,
Look at that.
nice.
Good morning to you on the live chat. All right, we have futures lower this morning after that higher than expected jobs report. It pulled stocks lower Friday. The data pushing investors to feel the Fed will keep rates higher for longer. We'll find out this week. We have policymakers announcing their decision on Wednesday. That same morning, we'll also get a CPI print. So we have NASDAQ futures little change, down 9 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 43 points. S&P futures, they're little change, down 4 points. The bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.88%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%. That's up 2 basis points. To currencies, European elections really having an impact on the euro. Fell to its lowest in more than a month. It's now down about 0.5% at 107.55 against the dollar. The dollar edging higher this morning. And this week, Tesla, their board will be taking another vote on whether to give Elon Musk a $56 billion pay package. Tesla shares down about 0.2%. And Nvidia begins trading today after its 10-for-1 stock split. Shares are down about 0.2%.
So it opens 10 for 1?
10
yes.
for 1.
How about
Yes.
that?
I can finally buy shares.
Yes.
Yes. You can be in it.
Yes.
That's your business flash, Tom and
Lisa
Paul.
Mateo, thank you so much. He has the toughest job on Wall Street. Let me explain. Richard Bernstein, 29 years ago, changed the discussion of American finance with a book called Style Investing. It immediately went into the CFA curricula. And it's just it's a little advanced, it's a little nerdy, there's some math in it. But Richard Bernstein, then at Merrill Lynch, completely changed the dialogue. And I can't think of a worse thing, Paul, than being a bond guy in an equity house. Mean, it's un-American.
Yep.
Why don't you bring in our next guest,
Exactly.
a stranger in a foreign land?
Stranger in a foreign land. He joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, Michael Contopoulos. He's head of fixed income at Richard Bernstein Advisors. Michael, you guys in fixed income haven't done anything for the last several years. It's been a tough place to be. 22 was historically bad. 23, kind of November, December, bailed you guys out a little bit. Tough this year. What's your call here on just how we should approach fixed income here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think at the end of the day, tough is depending on how you're positioned.
Okay.
If you're, on the front end of the curve, if you've owned floating rate debt, if you've owned, to some degree credit, you've actually done reasonably okay the last couple of years. And that's how I think you should be positioned today, certainly on the front end of the curve and lower duration. That's going to continue to perform pretty well as the Fed keeps rates higher for longer.
So, I mean, again, a lot of folks are saying I can stick with my 2-year Treasury close to 5%. Yeah. Do I need to take any credit risk above and beyond that, or no?
No, not necessarily. When you look at credit spreads, they're about as rich as they've ever been. I mean, IG credit spreads are about 88 basis points. High yield credit spreads, low 300s. It's not that the fundamentals are bad. Going back to all the stuff that Rich has done over a course of career, profit growth is strong. Profits drive fundamentals. And at the end of the day, you can't argue that profit growth is accelerating. That should be good for credit. It's more a valuation argument. valuation in IG and high yield corporate bonds, traditional fixed rate debt is atrocious. So we think you're supposed to stay away from that, not from a fundamental point of view, but more from a valuation
Does
point
the
of view.
shop, and does Mr. I mean, they're to lunch, you know, they're going to Michael's or, you know,
of course.
fancy, you know, linen. And, would you like still or sparkling? You're at one of those lunches with Richard Bernstein. Is dividend growth an equivalent to a yield?
It certainly can be, absolutely. And so, you know, you kind of want to watch the bond proxies here, whether or not being, you know, whether it's obviously bonds or whether it's bond-like.
Come on, he's underselling himself. You're expert in convertibles and preferreds. Are they a value here? Does that present yield in a preferred help?
Yeah, I mean, listen, preferreds do look attractive. We were actually overweight preferreds after SVB last year. We reduced that exposure more recently, more because of the duration aspect of preferreds, and you can buy obviously lower duration preferreds and so on and so forth. But
who issues preferreds these days? Is it just financial institutions?
No, it's a broad swath.
Okay.
Financial institutions tend to be the bulk of the preferred issuance, but not the sole issuers of preferreds, which is why, quite frankly, last year they were such an opportunity after SVB and First Republic, is because of the finance side. Mm-hmm. But no, it's about 50% of the market is in preferreds. But rather than preferreds, which do offer a nice yield and on a percentile basis actually look quite attractive, they're like in the 55th percentile, 60th percentile for cheapness, why not own CLOs, which give you a similar yield with no interest rate risk?
Paul, can I go nerd here on a Monday?
Yeah.
Okay, I read Michael Mauboussin over the weekend, who was at Credit Suisse maybe when you were there. And so you were tutoring Credit Suisse, and back then there was a religion, a modern theory out of Eugene Fama and, you know, French and the rest of them. And I guess my question is what's the underlying theory now, or have we blown it up as Michael Mauboussin predicted we would?
In terms of the...
of capturing yield after this bond debacle that Paul described.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you got to be careful trying to reach for yield. Depends on how you get that yield, right? So if you actually are searching for yield through credit risk, then I think you need to be a little bit wary here. All right, if you're searching through yield through short-term treasuries or floating rate debt or more risk-free assets, I think you're onto something, right? But this idea that yields are going to necessarily be your friend here is not the truth, because you could get some serious price depreciation, right, as rates go higher. And I think rates could go higher, and I think secularly rates are going to go higher. And so you have to be careful with this idea that we're going to lock in a lot of yield through credit risk in a higher rate environment when credit spreads are very low. That's not going to work for you.
So you don't think, so what do you think the Fed is going to do over the next 6 to 12 months?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, I think certainly over the next 6 months.
We've had 2 guests this morning say nothing.
I'm ready to refinance my mortgage. You guys are killing me.
We got to get better guests.
Well, we need 12 months is a long time.
Okay,
12 months is a long time.
Right.
But as I look out towards the year, end of the year, I don't know why the Fed is cutting towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
I got to ask one final question. Sure. What have you learned about equities working for Richard Bernstein?
Everything.
What have you learned?
Everything I know from Rich. I don't know everything about equities, but everything I know.
You walked in with some fancy degrees, fancy resume. Bernstein said, yeah, I'll take this guy. What have you learned about equities from Richard Bernstein?
Profits are the thing that matters the most. It's not the economy. It's not politics. It's not momentum. It's profits.
Absolutely right. And take it over to free cash flow.
That's right.
Capital allocation.
That's absolutely right.
Don't be a stranger. Michael Katopoulos with his head of fixed income for Richard Bernstein Advisors. Can't say enough about that. Sarah Hunt coming up as well with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. After a crushing defeat in the European Parliament election, President Emmanuel Macron plunged France into political uncertainty with a snap legislative ballot that restages his perennial battle with far-right rival Marine Le Pen. While Macron's position as head of state won't be directly affected by the upcoming vote, his ability to push through legislation, the power to choose a like-minded prime minister, and the credibility of his political project will all be on the line. Former President Donald Trump meets virtually today with probation officers who will recommend his sentence in the New York business records case. He was found guilty of all 34 counts in his hush money trial. Yesterday, in sweltering heat, supporters of Trump came out for a rally in Las Vegas to hear the former president. Trump slammed President Biden and his trip honoring the 80th anniversary of D-Day in France.
Did you see Biden yesterday in Normandy? And he was in France. He embarrassed us so badly, right? Does everyone know that?
Today, Trump is scheduled to address a Christian group that calls for abortion to be eradicated entirely. The former president will speak virtually at an event put on by the Danbury Institute, which is meeting in Indianapolis. Meanwhile, President Biden wrapped up his trip to France. Before returning home, the president visited the cemetery in Belleau Woods, where Marines who served in World War I are buried. It is the same cemetery Donald Trump skipped 6 years ago.
More Marines were lost here than any battle until the middle of World War II. The idea that I'd come to Normandy and not make this short trip here to pay tribute.
The president used the trip to highlight unity among allies of the U.S. Trial continues today for President Biden's son, Hunter. The defense said it would take the weekend to consider whether to put Hunter Biden on the stand in his own defense. He's pleaded not guilty to 3 federal charges, including possessing a gun while knowing he was a drug user. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. And Michael, so I think I speak for Paul and Lisa, thank you for your coverage of D-Day. It's just been world class what we've seen Michael Barr do here over the last 6 days. This visit that the president made yesterday is really unfortunate, Paul. It was done on a Sunday. I would have loved to have covered it on Friday. This is east-northeast of Paris. If you say, I want to go to the Champagne District, this is basically the road to the Champagne District. And this goes back to World War I. Think of any of the movies, including the horrific All Along the Western Front that was recently done here in the last 2 years. And this is a huge emotional issue for veterans. And that, as Mr. Biden alluded to and Michael Barr alluded to, we had one president in the reign who decided it was too far to go. And we had another president stretch his state dinner with Mr. Macron over to this. In the interior of the chapel, there are 1,400 unknown soldiers. That's how bad this was. I mean, just absolutely, just one of the many, like the Somme in World War II, Aston Martin American Cemetery and Memorial. The president visits that in the non-news Sunday of this weekend. Futures improve. What am I going to say here, Paul? I mean, we got all these distractions, and the market keeps going up.
The market keeps going up.
That's a fancy analysis.
Yes, and I guess it's just the anticipation of some Fed rate cut at some point in the future, even though it's been pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. Presumably, it's still out there. And in the backdrop, we had a pretty solid earnings cycle here. So you put those two things together, and that kind of gives you some support for the bulls out there.
We're going to come back and touch on this. Ryan Vestisa of Bloomberg News, Apple's $471 billion rally in hopes of the meeting today. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures as focus shifts to inflation data. Federal Reserve meeting on interest rates. Policymakers will announce their decision on Wednesday. Their forecast to keep borrowing costs at a 2-decade high. Right now we have NASDAQ futures, little change, down 9 points. Dow futures, little change as well, down 30 points. S&P futures, down 2 points. We'll take you over to the bond market where the 2-year yield is at 4.88%. That's down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield, 4.45%, up 1 basis point. What's moving the markets? We'll start with Moderna. Their shares up more than 1%, said its combination flu and COVID shot, well, it met the goals of a key late-stage trial. And then you have Southwest Airlines. They're up nearly 8%. The Wall Street Journal reported that Elliott Investment Management, it's built an almost $2 billion stake in the carrier, and it plans to push for some changes. We'll see what happens. And finally, WeWork's former New York headquarters, well, it's been taken over by its co-working rival, Industrious. They signed a 10-year agreement to manage 240,000 square feet of office space in Midtown. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
This soap opera just continues. I walked in a WeWork once, and I didn't know what, honestly, I didn't know what
Did you really go? Yeah.
I was in a WeWork once to a Bryant Park.
Yeah.
And that was years ago, lifetime ago.
And they own, they own real estate all over the
place. Do they make any money?
I don't know. I don't know what the latest iteration is and what the latest ownership is.
In the last 5 days, just to mention this quickly, I mentioned Michael Mauboussin, writing for Morgan Stanley now, with a brilliant summary of the history of index concentration and portfolio concentration. And I didn't realize, the way we have the big tech now.
I know.
This has been normal. There's other times it's been like this. In the 60s or the 50s.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's necessarily a healthy aspect of the market. I mean, this focus on a handful of stocks, a dozen stocks in terms of the market capitalization. Right. But that's where we are here with big tech.
We bring it up because Sarah Hunt joins us right now. Sarah Hunt with Alpine Woods Capital Investors. The top 10 stocks in our holding make up 142% of the portfolio. Have you ever seen it this concentrated?
Good morning. I have not. And I think that is something that we were discussing last year. It is something that is going to continue to be, well, but also we were talking about it last year because you had the top 7, right? They were a big percentage. They had to rebalance the S&P last year in the middle of the year, which they don't usually do because the concentration got so high. So that is something that we're going to continue to contend with.
Why do they do that? I mean, the fact is the index is the index. If that's the numbers, that's the numbers. So they basically made up fictional numbers because they thought the concentration was too much.
Well, I don't think that anyone anticipated the concentration becoming this high because you didn't think that you were going to have capitalization weighted that would become, like NVIDIA just reached $1 trillion. So you didn't think that was going to happen that fast.
Well, then we've just got the story out from Vian Vasilika of the $470 billion rally in Apple. Are these things under-owned? Is that really the shock here that NVIDIA or Apple are actually under-owned by American Wall Street?
Well, given the concentration in the S&P, relatively speaking, you could say yes about some of that. I think that even when people bought NVIDIA as it was moving up, it was racing so far ahead and it was getting a more and more side of the index where even if you owned it, you were underweight. And I think Apple went through somewhat of a correction and somewhat of a left behind era. And I don't think that people were holding as much Apple as the S&P is holding. But there's a risk to that too, because when something like Apple has a downdraft, all of a sudden, if you're 8% Apple, like the index was, that's a big problem for your portfolio.
So what are you suggesting folks do these days? Chase those magnificent whatever number they are, or try to find value outside of those big tech names?
I think it's a combination of the two because chase is a word that I hate to use, but the big tech stocks that are generating tons of cash, it's difficult to say I don't want them in my portfolio even though the valuations continue to rise because they're not in any kind of trouble. This is not the dot-com era where a lot of the stocks that were running were stocks that had to be financed by their vendors. These are companies that can pay for all of NVIDIA's chips, right? This is Google and Meta. These are companies that can pay for the stuff that NVIDIA is building. But I also think you have to look around and say there are other areas of the market that are under-owned. I can look for good dividends. I can look for good cash flow. I can look for things like buybacks. And I can look for areas where I don't have to worry as much about that multiple. And then I can see what happens with the Fed because that's a whole other iteration at the minute.
Right. Paul, downdraft, the pandemic, Apple down 35% into the October bottom, the Ed Yardeni, Ralph Ancambora bottom, Apple down 29%.
Yeah.
So those are the drawdowns.
Those are the drawdowns. Yeah. So, Sarah, I mean, a lot of things, how do you guys start off with just your allocations these days, equity versus fixed income? Because I'm very happy sitting on the 2-year Treasury getting darn close to 5%.
It depends a lot on the investor themselves, and we manage a combination of individual accounts and then also funds. So I think that you're looking at what someone's where they are in their investment life cycle matters a lot about what your fixed income allocation is going to be, and also what their risk tolerance is. There are some people that even though bonds have actually now have a yield, which they didn't for a decade and a half, people got so used to not owning bonds that they look at equity returns and they say 5% is not enough. But then you have a bad year like 2022 and you think, you know, it would have been nice, although bonds had their own problems in 2022. So I think that there is a good case to be made for having an allocation to bonds. It depends on who you are, where you are in that cycle, and we also manage some balanced accounts. So that also, you want some of that fixed income, and finally it's helping you after years of not being available.
Do you see dividend growth? We just asked Contopoulos or Richard Bernstein this. Do you see dividend growth as a yield equivalent? Is it competing with yield, the Sweeney 2-year?
I think that it is. I think depending on the sector and depending on what the company can do, I don't want to see a yield that's growing because someone's going into debt to pay that dividend. But if I've got growing cash flow and I can increase the dividend, it's not necessarily going to give me what a 2-year is, but I also have some potential capital appreciation on the side.
The math of this is 30% of stocks succeed, 70% of stocks that don't. How do you choose that 30% winners right now, looking at 3 years or 5 years? What's the key determinant?
Well, I think that requires looking into or having a discussion about where you think things are going. If you look at the whole technology space that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and has been for the last decade, it used to be it ran on cycles that were attached to things like PCs and phones. Now it's going on cycles of what is the car build? What is this? The industrial absorption of technology and the absorption of technology across the board has been incredibly rapid. Is that going to change in the next 3 to 5 years? I don't think so. Does it matter what you pay for these things? Yes, it does. So you have to keep an eye on both what you anticipate to happen and sort of say where industry is going to have problems. People right now think the energy industry is going away. It's going to be a much longer tail than people think, but it's a difficult area to have exposure to because people don't like it as much. But there is a longer term reality that we are going to be needing fossil fuels for a lot longer than people want to admit.
So I guess just stepping back here, how about valuation for this market? We've seen stocks run here. We've had good earnings. I'm not sure if the earnings are good enough to support the moves we've seen in this market over the last 12 months. How do you think about valuation?
Well, that's also, it ends up being sector dependent as well, because you see that the valuations in the technology sector are higher. You've seen some of that come down as the spend has shifted from things like software to things like chips, right? So there's a change there, and you have to be careful because some of those valuations in technology are very high.
Do you care about Apple today? Are you going to acquire shares off this meeting?
We own Apple already, so do we want it to go well? Yes. Am I going to add more to it at the moment? Probably not, because you just had the stock rally back another 10 or 15% in the last couple of weeks.
Nobody's talking about it. It's been an amazing rally.
It had a huge rally. So that was, but you didn't sell it when it went down, right? Because that's the participation that you have to continue to have.
Sarah, thank you so much.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Sarah Hunt, thank you so much this morning. Here on the equity markets and with it was the Alpine Woods Capital, I should say, as well. I mean, Anurag Rana and Mark Gurman, not back to back, but
no, but they'll give us. They're going to give us.
They can't be in the same room at the same time.
No, and again, Mark Gurman, we think he just pitches a tent outside the Apple headquarters, and that's where he gets all his scoops from. Yeah, you know, I think he's right there. As people walk in to get
coffee shops in Cupertino.
That's where he gets all his scoops.
Do they have a beach out there? Like, does everybody go to the club?
I don't know what they've got over there. I mean, it's amazing headquarters. I see it from the 101. I've never been to it.
The satellite thing.
Yeah, it's just
Have you been to
amazing.
it, Sarah?
No. See? So, I mean, it's a select few, but it's just amazing. So we'll see. But again, people want to see some AI coming out of Apple today.
AI.
I think that's.
Sarah's nodding her head.
Yeah, she knows what's going on.
AI.
That's where you get the valuation.
Like Siri, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Siri, can you kill the flies in the living room?
Right.
I mean, you know what? I don't get it. Futures advance from -9 to -2. Sarah Hunt driving the market higher. Stay with us worldwide. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got right on the screen, but little movement in futures right now. NASDAQ, Dow, and S&P futures, all little change. We have NASDAQ futures down about 10 points, Dow futures down 27, S&P futures down 2. The 2-year yield at 4.88%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.56%, and that's up 2 basis points. We'll take a look at commodities. We have spot gold higher, $2,307 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $80 a barrel. WTI crude, $76 a barrel. What's moving the markets? We want to turn the focus to Advanced Micro Devices. Their shares are down about 2%. Morgan Stanley downgraded the company to equal weight from overweight. They're saying that investor expectations for its AI business seemed, quote, too high. Then you have CrowdStrike, GoDaddy, KKR. Their shares all on the rise. It was confirmed those stocks would join the S&P 500 index in the latest quarterly weighting change. We have CrowdStrike up 5%, GoDaddy up 3%, KKR up 8%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. 8:30. That means it's time for economic data. A little dearth of it today. That's not true later in the week. CPI.
Oh, yeah.
Fed meeting as well. The Fed decides. We'll give you that Wednesday afternoon. But key economic data here to figure out where real GDP is. I think it's a real mystery. All of our economic indicators and our coverage is brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth. Go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. And we thank Commonwealth for their support, particularly Commonwealth of Boston. Thank you so much. This next guest needs some really, we got to frame it for you folks. I mean, he came out of MIT physics. And then what you do is you go across the Charles River
to get a PhD.
And at Boston University, their Center for Space Physics, my father used to talk about this. And he would say, this is the best program in the country. And of course, if you have that breeding, you only get one job. I mean, you know, it's either Starbucks or Jet Propulsion Lab. Joining us now, not at the Jet Propulsion Lab, but George Patterson, CIO, PGIM Quantitative Solutions, with all of that fancy math background. Tell us the quantum mechanics right now, George Patterson, of the mathiness of these markets. Is it readable math with probabilistic tendencies that are doable? Or are you and the other smart guys making it up as you go?
Thank you very much. Great opportunity to be here. And I'm so glad I never thought about that alternative career trajectory for me. But I'll keep it in my back pocket. Hopefully I don't need it. We're not making it up. We use a number of mathematical tools to monitor the market and see where opportunities are. We are at the end of the day investors, right? So we're not doing things that are ungrounded, right? We're grounded in fundamentals. We're grounded in techniques, and we're looking to do things in a very systematic manner. That's why we like the math. It allows us to decouple emotion from the decision-making process.
Where we are right now, away from the bell curve, away from the Gaussian tendency, are you seeing a leverage influence, what's called kurtosis, which gives you the tail risk that Nassim Taleb talks about? Are we moving to a legitimate tail risk right now with this crazy overconcentration in tech?
So the U.S. is rather interesting with tech. Yes, it is. It is rather unique. I don't think we're going to be into a tail risk environment. I think, quite honestly, the fundamentals in the U.S. are relatively strong, and I think we have a very good chance at a soft landing. The reason we talk about some of these words like skewness and kurtosis is because at the end of the day, everything they taught you in college or graduate school about statistics is a good place to start, but the real world is more complex, right? You can't model it as a normal distribution. You can't just worry about the mean and the standard deviation. You have to worry about tails. And that's why we start talking about some of these concepts. So I don't think we're on the verge of a tail risk scenario right now. But you have to plan for these things.
All right. So George, You know, I was told there wouldn't be math here, but that aside, where does the math take you these days in looking for opportunities?
So at PGIM Quantitative Solutions, we're focused very long term. And what we're seeing is that many institutional investors are revisiting and reallocating to emerging markets. And that's, you know, quite honestly, if you look at emerging markets long term, there's a lot of great structural drivers. You know, the demographics are right. They've been actually reducing rates in the, you know, ahead of many other countries. And if you look at a lot of the fundamentals are really lining up very nicely. Now, EM is not it's not uniform. It's a group of many different countries, and there's a lot of different opportunities there.
So when we think about emerging markets, how far do we think in advance here? Because, I mean, near term, there seem to be a lot of challenges. But again, if you think long term, emerging markets have always been attractive for the potential growth they promise. How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, so one of the challenges is with regards to timing, and this is one of the areas that we like to try and not make a timing decision. Timing decisions in the investment world are extremely difficult. So, you know, our view is, and this is the view that our clients come to us, is that we want to take a longer term view and we want to be pre-positioned, because when these markets start to move, oftentimes you can't really chase them, or if you are chasing them, you're paying a huge premium. So, you know, we think about this as kind of 12 months out. But again, we're not, you know, could come sooner, might take a little bit longer, but structurally, this is where we see the opportunity.
So, George, I mean, talk to us about China here, because I don't know, when I think about emerging markets, I mean, when I think about emerging markets, I know it's a huge part of the MSCI, but I'm one of those folks that feels like I'm not even sure China is investable these days. How do you guys approach that?
So as I said, emerging markets are not uniform, right? It's a group of countries, and the countries are very disparate. So China is the number one country where we often see people looking for EMX China. And again, as you said, you know, I'm not quite sure I would call it uninvestable. There has been a recent rally, but there's still a number of structural problems around real estate, around like just low, you know, domestic demand in China, reliance on exports, and political tension. So I agree with you. I think many of the clients that we're talking to are interested in EMX China. Right. That said, you know, there's still great opportunity in India. There's great opportunity in Brazil. You know, Brazil in particular might be out of favor at the moment, but longer term, there's just a huge opportunity there.
Where's the PGIM blended actuarial assumption heading? Are you know, now that we've had a return to a real yield, a return to an actual nominal coupon, have you adjusted in your head the presumed actuarial assumption forward?
So I'm not an actuary, but I could follow up on that. Yeah, that's something that's
but George, come on. I mean, the actuaries listen to you. I mean, that's the bottom line. We got a Fed with an R-starred. Everybody's telling us the R-star is going to be elevated up to some new level. Should our audience look for a 7% return, or are you going to push it down to a 6% return?
Listen, you know, the challenge with all of these numbers is that there's a huge band of uncertainty. You know, you think that around economics and econometric models that, you know, they're as precise as the models that we have in physics, right? They're not, right? So no one knows what the actual R-star is. And there's a big band of uncertainty around it. So whenever you estimate these parameters, you have to understand, like, what's the uncertainty around that? You know, what's the standard deviation, if you want to get back into the math terms, to understand the uncertainty? Because when you build models, you're always having to think about how robust they are. Right. And where do you have precision and where do you not have precision? So that's one of those areas that I just don't find it worth trying to make that forecast because there's so much uncertainty around it.
One final question. George, this is important. You come out of Fenway Park and you go by the cask and flagon and you walk across a bridge to Kenmore Square and you look down to your left and there's an observatory on top of a roof at Boston University. Did you ever look at the stars in the Coit Observatory at BU?
Yes, I did. Yes, it rather impressive. Yes, it's a little tough to get a good look at the skies from Boston just because there's so much stray light.
It's a little tough is barely describing it. George Patterson of Boston University and PGIM as well. Thank you so much for that. I went up there as a kid, and I was bored stiff. All I wanted to do was go see Fenway Park.
Right.
And my father took me by my left ear and dragged me up to this observatory. And it's back to like before the 1940s.
Is it? Okay.
This historic relic, and everybody within the pristine physics program at BU at gunpoint is forced to go up there.
Yep.
And as he says, the light of Boston, you can barely see the stars because of the expansion of the light in Boston, where Michael Barr lives. You can see the Milky Way.
Oh, yeah.
With our news to New York City, Michael Barr.
You can eat a lot of them, too. Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. The European Union is licking their wounds after the right makes huge gains in parliamentary elections. For the past 2 years, senior leaders have been noting how unified Europe is. This vote shows it is not. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen putting on a brave face.
We may differ on individual points, but we all have an interest in stability, and we all want a strong and effective Europe.
The right could now become a major player in policies ranging from migration to security and climate. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is calling for snap elections. He dissolved the lower house of parliament and called for new legislative elections after his party came a distant second to Marine Le Pen's far right in Sunday's European parliamentary vote. Benny Gantz resigned from Israel's emergency government and called for elections, criticizing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the war against Hamas. The departure of Gantz, a Netanyahu rival and former general, won't cause the ruling coalition to collapse, but it deprives the government of a moderate voice during the war that began after Hamas's October 7th attack. Senator Lindsey Graham says the U.S. needs to seize Russian assets and send them to Ukraine. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
Senator Graham in France for the D-Day commemoration has met with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and says the window is closing to really continue to help Ukraine fight the war. Graham on CBS, as heard on Bloomberg, says Zelensky wants
for us to go after the Russian assets all over the world, take the money from the sovereign wealth funds of Russia and give it to Ukraine. There's $300 billion sitting in Europe from Russian sovereign wealth assets that we should seize.
And he says more in the U.S. and that it would really hurt Russia. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom Baldy.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're always brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers. They charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83% rates, subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. OMG, a briefcase sighting here.
Exactly.
At Bloomberg. Paul, you trash on me. I'm the last surviving person with a briefcase.
Peter from the 5th floor just walked by with, a hard briefcase, not a backpack, not a satchel.
Not a Herschel thing with a leather strap.
No, this is a leather briefcase from back in the day. Think Mad Men. And I saw Peter walk by. I said, I haven't seen one of those briefcases in I don't know how long. I had one back in the day in the early days of investment banking, but you never see those things anymore.
Like the hard ones that click open, you press it and they go flip,
exactly.
and
A
they
hard
click
briefcase
open.
with the clip and the things and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Again, kind of Mad Men.
The new thing is to carry the bag around. Manus Craney has one.
Does he?
Could you see me like in the Louis Vuitton bag?
Yeah, I don't know.
You need the crossbody, Tom. The
Yes,
crossbody bag.
Or a fanny pack. I mean, Michael Barr with the fanny pack, maybe?
Well, actually, I had an A&P shopping bag. That was the best thing I had.
I tell you, Peter looks solid walking by there.
But it's important. You got to have the look.
I know. Peter's got it. All right, very good.
So I can keep my briefcase with
me,
like
sure.
offending Lisa.
Yep. You and Peter. Yep.
It's from San Francisco. It's like 1 million years old. Churchill had one.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Futures at -4. That's what they told me when they sold it to me. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures this morning as the focus turns at Federal Reserve policymakers updating their rates forecast on Wednesday and the release of inflation data for May. NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, same for Dow and S&P futures. As we look at the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.88%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.47%, and that's up 3 basis points. We have spot gold higher, $2,305 an ounce over to oil Brent crude, $80 a barrel. WTI crude $76 a barrel. Microsoft making some news. Its Xbox division announced plans for new entries into the Doom and Gears of War franchises. They said Call of Duty Black Ops 6 will be released as an online-only game later this year. Their shares up about 0.1%. GameStop, have to check in for Tom. Yes, cutting back some of the losses it took on Friday after announcing plans to sell those new shares. Right now, they're up about 3%. And tighter budgets, turning a lot of vacationers to a staycation. Wallet Hub has the best states to do this. Coming in at number 1, Orlando, Florida. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Paul's like me. We're like,
Where's the water? Where's the water?
You're kidding
At
me?
Disney theme parks and the water parks.
Come on, New York City has to be the greatest staycation as a general statement in the world. I'm serious.
I'm serious. I do it.
I mean, are we back to pre-pandemic tourism here?
It feels like it in Midtown these days when you walk.
Somebody said, I mean, I've got Japanese yen at like an 80-something as fair value by the fancy people. So weak yen at 156, everybody's going to Japan.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I guess it's like demonstrably you can feel it.
Right.
So here's what we're going to do. We got the Apple thing today. We got Mark Gurman coming up at the 9 o'clock hour. So we're going to do Apple gossip with Mr. Gurman. He's the best in the world. And the best in the world is how Apple takes all this and folds it into our future, which is a cloud. Anurag Rana joins senior tech analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence. Anurag, at the end of this conference today, are you going to know Apple's commitment to AI, which then is their commitment into the cloud?
Yeah, the commitment's already there. We've seen that from so many announcements. But the big question is whether it's going to drive the next iPhone cycle or not. And Mark's done a phenomenal job of giving us kind of everything that we're going to hear today. But I think the body language and the way they present it is going to be equally important from Apple.
So, Anurag, looking at your research here, one of the numbers that jumps out at me is over 40% of its 800 million plus smartphone devices are iPhone 12 or older. I am definitely within that group. What's going to get me off the sidelines to upgrade here? Is it something AI related, or is it just time?
See, Paul, in your case, I think it will be time, because if you're not adopting it at this point, so you're part of the late adopter series. The thing that I'm most interested in today's announcement is what kind of phone do I need to run all the features? Mark Gurman said that it's going to be iPhone 15 Pro or the next generation that's coming this winter. I think what that could do is you're going to drive those early adopters, people who have the 14 and the 15s. You could see some of that refresh too. But in the 12 and below, I think the battery life is what drives a lot of those refreshes. Is when your phone dies, you basically go get another one.
Anurag, can you just refresh our memory? What is OpenAI, and does Apple need to do a deal with OpenAI?
Yeah, so think about it, that they are selling software that is going to make AI easier for anybody. They are the single most important company for what everybody talks about right now is large language model, a massive algorithm that can help you summarize things quickly, make pictures, and do everything a consumer really enjoys to do. If that's embedded in the iPhone, your productivity should get a boost. And the big question is whether Apple's going to do a deal with them.
Right.
And Mark's already reported that's probably a done deal. But the big question for me again is whether they're going to do another deal with Google, because if they give consumers a choice, I think that's going to help them out from a regulatory point of view also.
So who's the Anurag Rana winner right now in this sweepstakes?
I think this is everybody is going to get a little piece of the puzzle. The question is whether this is going to push people to go out and refresh their iPhones. I think it has the ability to do that. But at the same time, from a, you could say, hype point of view, we have seen so much talked about it right now. And, typically what happens is, people go back home disappointed that I already knew most of these things walking in. So it's going to be probably the most important event Apple's done in the last 5 to 7 years that I can think of.
But the history is they get in bed with Google when they have to. You're predicting that today?
I can't say if it's today, but they have a very big deal with Google right now on the search side. So it's a question is whether they're going to license their large language models too. And Mark's reported that they are having these talks with Google, but nothing's been finalized. And whether it's today or a month from now or 3 months from now, I think it's an important thing.
But Paul, this is huge because the history of this is they did the meeting, and when they announced the searchy thing, Eric Schmidt walked out on stage.
Yeah.
I mean that, and people were stunned.
Yeah.
And of course, the litigation now, the government, that's what's involved. But I wonder if we're going to get drama like Eric Schmidt walking out on stage.
That'd be great.
Or Satya Nadella.
Right. Exactly. Talk to us about security, Anurag, as we think about AI. Security is an issue, and I know security has always been at the forefront of Apple products and services. How does Apple position themselves in terms of security?
Yeah, this is Apple's marquee thing, and I'm always surprised that people don't talk about this a lot. Apple's made it a massive point that they are not going to use your data to sell products to you, which is exactly what Google and Meta does. Now, in the Apple's case, I think this is going to be the single biggest differentiator between the way they are approaching AI and all the others. They're going to talk about chips that is going to help them protect that data. They're not going to collect and use your data to sell things back to you. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis on that particular element.
Anurag, how's the market feel about Tim Cook these days? I think he's done, a lot of folks, I think just looking at the stock price, have done a phenomenal job. But as it relates to AI, is there concern that maybe Tim Cook and company are a little bit behind the curve here?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies were caught off guard when OpenAI came up with ChatGPT, and Apple and Google being, two biggest one at that point. Microsoft kind of skated through because they did a deal with OpenAI. But I would say all the big companies really were behind when this happened. Now, Apple, I think, has figured this out that they really need to focus this. They got rid of the car initiative. All energy is going after AI. Now, they may not have their own model, but they do have the you could say financial or the distribution strength to make an alliance with the two best companies that are out there.
I know you don't do buy, hold, sell, but we've had a $400 billion rally in Apple into this moment here in 3 hours, I think. We're going to see this. How do you describe that rally, the character of that rally?
I think it seems to me that people really figured out that the China issue is something that people don't really focus on in this case. There was a lot of debate whether China is a structural problem or a cyclical problem. I think more and more people are coming in that camp that, the three of us talked about many times. We think it's a cyclical problem, not a structural issue. And I think that is a big reason for this rally and not just the AI hype.
Anurag, thank you so much. I don't know, my head's spinning.
Well, I think for Apple, for me, China, and I know Anurag was saying, a lot of folks think it's cyclical, but I'm just concerned that it is a longer-term issue that Chinese consumers, for a variety of reasons, shun Western products, including Apple products. And if that, I don't know how you deal with that if you're Tim Cook and the folks in Cupertino, but we'll have to see how that plays out. But again, the bulls feel like Apple products are superior, and they will continue to kind of rule the day there.
Now, Mark Gurman's scheduled to be with us in a treat. Lori Calvasina will start off the next hour as well. So all my family's busting my chops. And Paul, it's Penn State's fault.
Yeah.
A girl at Penn State puts out literally a 15-second TikTok or 20-second. And then another girl, really gifted, named Sad Alex, makes it into a song. It's bigger than Taylor Swift.
Is it?
It's huge.
I missed it.
It's like the song of the summer, and I'm getting my chops busted all the time.
Okay.
Because
you're the music guy.
Blue-eyed, and trust fund. And I'm like, where's the trust fund?
Oh, here we go. Yeah,
I don't have the trust fund. Sad Alex with the song of the summer for Bloomberg Surveillance.
Please God, let him be rich, let him be tall, let him buy all the things my pretty heart wants. Make his eyes like the sea, so it's easy to fall, and he's all over me. Look
Organic finance, trust fund, 65 blue eyes. Finance, trust fund, 65 blue eyes. Finance, trust fund, 65 blue eyes. Finance, trust fund, 65 blue eyes.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Bloomberg Surveillance, and there it is in the intro. Paul, is Apple under-owned by Wall Street?
I can't imagine. I mean, if you don't own Apple, I don't know where you've been. But again, I think this is going to be an important day for Apple, Tom.
Yeah.
Because again, a lot of folks feel like Apple hasn't fully gotten the AI lift that some of their tech peers have. So we'll have to see what they say today.
This is what it's about, folks. This is what Bloomberg Surveillance is about. In the next hour and 15 minutes, we just met with Anurag Rana of Bloomberg Intelligence. Mark Gurman will close out the hour, he doesn't get up until like 10 p.m.
No, it's a player. Yeah.
I mean, Ludlow is up before Gurman.
Yes.
I mean, it's that bad.
Yep.
Mark Gurman will join us here. A really, really important day for Mr. Cook and Apple. Lori Calvasina in moments. Terry Haines will join us just moments ago on the European elections, its impact for Mr. Trump and President Biden. Nanette Abaoff-Jacobson as well from Hartford Funds. Solid hour, I say, as well. Paul, the theme here is one rate cut.
Yeah,
sort of
I don't know where
the new theme.
Yep. So, I mean, if you don't get a rate cut, what happens to this market? Because we came into the year, Tom, with 6 rate cuts priced in, and now, I don't know, kind of less than, I'm running around 1 or something like that. I don't know. So
Anna Wong looks brilliant.
I know.
Citibank looks brilliant.
Yep.
They called for this.
Very good.
Some
Let's check
others.
in with some smart folks here.
Jim Bianco.
Yep, we know him. Lori Calvasina joins us now from the lawn of the University of Virginia, head of U.S. Equity Strategy, RBC Capital Markets. So, Lori, what happens if this Federal Reserve says, you know what, the data does not support a rate cut? What happens to the market here?
Hi, well, thanks for having me as always. And look, I think that's a fantastic question. If you want to just go purely by the numbers, when we walk through that kind of scenario, getting, just no moves, further moves by the Fed this year, no cuts, no hikes, stickier inflation than anticipated, and say 10-year yields, sort of settle out around the recent highs. Our work says that knocks the PE multiple down a little bit below 21 and pulls the S&P 500. If you're looking on my earnings, which are 237, around 4,900. If you're looking a little more generously at consensus earnings, which are around 245, you get closer to 5,100. But either way, we think there's some modest downside from here. We do think at this point in time, based on our modeling, this idea of getting 1, maybe 2 cuts and, kind of inflation coming down to 2.6 on PCE, that seems to be fully reflected in stock prices around 5,300 if you use the consensus earnings numbers. So we think we're fairly priced for that rosy scenario now. And if we don't get it, not a ton of damage to the market, but some, modest impacts.
Are you surprised, Lori, that the market has risen? I guess we're up 12% or so, somewhat this year, despite the fact that this market, again, went into the year discounting maybe 5 or 6 rate cuts, and now we're down to maybe 1 or 2. Despite that reduction in the Fed dovishness, the stock market's kind of risen here, 12%. Are you surprised by that?
Well, I think it's surprising from a Fed inflation interest rate angle. I think if you put it in the context of all these conflicting cross currents that we have, the big tailwind that's actually, I think, responsible for most of that appreciation is the economic tailwind. And so I love these stats, but if you look at the ECFC data on Bloomberg, and I look at this stuff every Friday, and you can track the consensus GDP forecast on the street, if you look at the 2024 number, last summer it was 0.6% for 2024 on real GDP on the annual basis. If you looked at that stat in January, it was 1.3%. And then I think it was sometime in February, we saw a big melt up and it crossed over the 2% mark. And now I believe it's sitting around 2.4% or so. 0 to 2% GDP is typically very weak for the equity market. 2 to 4, typically you get, kind of a 12 to 13% type gain. And that's about what we've gotten so far this year. So we've exited economic purgatory, and we've moved into the idea that the economy is actually pretty healthy.
But Lori, small cap, and I don't know where mid cap is in this debate, I'm not informed, are in purgatory.
Yes.
We've been here before. I really want to emphasize, folks, I can remember times where small cap was in purgatory. What's the catalyst of big cap south or small cap north?
So it's a great question, Tom. I think small cap PMs have been dealing with this, for a long time, but really focused on, in this cycle, when are we going to get those Fed cuts? If you look historically, small caps typically do well in easing cycles relative to large, but unfortunately, they don't tend to pre-trade it. They tend to see the inflection after the cuts start happening. And that's why I think small caps, they're not really making major new lows relative to large cap right now. They're trying to defend their ground because there's still some of that optimism out there, but we really need those cuts to come through. I do think the economic tailwinds are also putting the floor under them under a relative basis, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many charts I show people on the balance sheets, hedge funds think they're worse than large and want to beat them up as long as the Fed's in tightening mode.
Good morning, Pleasanton, California. Paul, I completely randomly off Russell 2000 took Simpson Manufacturing, 5,500 employees. They're at a 19 multiple. Their dividend growth is okay, not great, 4% per year for a very small dividend. And what do you do in an Apple world? What do you do in Pleasanton, California, if Cupertino owns the high ground? I don't get it.
Exactly. Simpson Manufacturing, I hadn't heard of that one before.
Never heard of it. They do wood stuff.
Exactly. Hey, Lori, I know you recently attended the RBC Consumer Conference. How do you think the consumer's doing out there? What did you hear at that conference?
So, I will say it was a fantastic conference. We had a really interesting cross-section of companies. One of the big takeaways that I heard was that the high end is still relatively resilient, but the low end in particular, and we've heard this on conference calls as well, is really seeing the impact of higher inflation. And then I heard a number of auto-related companies, and so really got an earful about the interest rate impact as well. And if I think about that conference, and I also kind of go back to this last reporting season, I think a lot of the themes on the consumer are still the same: high end versus low end, all these pressures, resilience, yada, 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 value consciousness. But it does seem just like the tone has, gotten a little bit worse. I think the way our analyst put it in his recap report was that the negative tone around some of these issues just escalated.
Lori, a smart observation out on Twitter, I'll get it, folks, 3, 2, 1. YouTube, the live chat. Chris, thank you. Out on YouTube, the live chat. And Lori, he says, where's the profits in Russell 2000? I mean, are these people generating profit? Are they capital allocating? Are they on an EVA spread basis making money like the fancy people?
So look, if you look at gauges of profitability in small cap or earnings quality, definitely if you look at the Russell 2000, those metrics don't look as good as they have historically. They typically, you have a higher percentage of negative earners in the Russell 2000 than the S&P. That's true, but that gap has exacerbated over time. Some of that is because of index composition issues. You have a lot of biotech sitting in small cap. You have a lot of REITs sitting in small cap. So some of it can be explained by that. But if you do look at sectors like technology, you're also seeing more loss makers. I think people do look at that to say, okay, it's a lower gauge of quality. The S&P 600 doesn't have as many of those issues, and it's still underperformed large caps as well. So I don't think you can blame small cap underperformance entirely on that. But honestly, Tom, people buy small caps for future growth, not necessarily present day profitability.
Lori, thank you so much. Lori Calvasina with RBC. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We have futures pretty much treading water at this point. Traders kind of bracing for that double dose of volatility on Wednesday. We have the latest read on consumer prices, also that rate decision from the Fed. The option market is betting a 1.25% move for the S&P 500 in either direction, depending on what happens with the Fed. So right now we have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, Dow futures down 0.1%, same for S&P futures. The 2-year yield 4.88%, that's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.46%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the euro slid to a 1-month low. The far right gains in the EU vote. Right now we have the euro down 0.5% at 107.47 against the dollar. Right now, Apple getting ready for the opportunity to show whether it can become that major player in the AI space and whether that can drive sales. Worldwide Developers Conference kicks off today. Apple shares up 0.2%. And this week, the Tesla board, they're taking another vote on whether to give Elon Musk a $56 billion pay package. We shall see what happens there. Tesla shares down about 0.5%. And NVIDIA begins trading today after its 10-for-1 stock split takes effect. Shares down more than 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Again, futures -10 with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Far-right parties saw big gains in European Union elections in Germany, France, and Italy. It could force the bloc to take a harder line on immigration and climate. Could it sound a warning for President Biden and his November rematch with former President Trump? Bloomberg's Laura Davison has more.
There's been a lot of tea leaf reading on what the sentiment is in Europe and what that means for the U.S. We've seen in the past, the results of British elections. Of course, they have their own here just in a couple weeks, sort of being a bellwether for what might happen in the U.S. Famously, the Brexit vote was just before Donald Trump was elected for the first time in 2016. So this is something that Democrats are looking at closely, as well as broader political experts, trying to suss out what this could mean, if anything, for a U.S. election.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in Washington. Former President Trump is expected to have his probation interview today following his criminal conviction on falsifying business records. The defense could soon call its final witness in the federal gun case being heard against Hunter Biden in Delaware. The big question is, will Hunter Biden take the stand? Prosecutors have tried to show that the president's son was addicted to crack when he bought a gun in 2018. But under cross-examination, witnesses acknowledged they didn't actually see Hunter Biden using drugs when he made the purchase. This is a sound you do not want to hear if you're on a mountain pass road. That is the sound of a 250-foot wide chunk of a mountain pass highway in Wyoming collapsing in a landslide. It has cut off a well-traveled link between small towns in eastern Idaho and the tourist destination of Jackson, Wyoming. No word yet on how long it will take to fix this vital road. It can have major implications on the immediate future of the tourism industry for Jackson. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom Paul Lisa.
I immediately called the $1 Million Cowboy Bar to be sure I could get from point A to point B.
Yep.
Safe.
Good.
It's south of where we stay in Jackson Hole.
But yeah, apparently that's a big deal for the folks out there. So
Ian Bremmer.
Yeah,
Ian Bremmer just puts out a long note. He's in O'Hare doing something. And he leads with inflation, Paul. You were correct. He leads with the inflation analysis versus the migration green analysis off the EU elections.
Yeah, exactly. And so, inflation, it's impacting everybody. Obviously, the folks at the lower end of the economic spectrum even more so, because they don't have the benefit of some of the rise we see in risk assets, whether it's stocks or bonds or home ownership. And those are the folks that are feeling it particularly.
Apple with a lift fractionally, 197. We're not to 200. I think the high is like a 199 level.
Yeah.
So we're sort of like,
But we rallied 20% off of that recent low.
Huge,
So it's had
half a trillion.
Yeah, and so it's had a big move here. And I think that's just in anticipation of what we might hear today.
What'd you learn from Lori Calvasina? That was fascinating.
Yep. A big fan of Lori Calvasina. It's some of these big cap names continue to perform well. And you asked a question, Tom. I mean, when, if ever, can small caps participate as well?
And the chart is something. We'll try to get that chart out on LinkedIn and Twitter as we can as well. The real yield, I barely touched on it. This is important, 2.14%. Not through the range, but nevertheless up to a higher level on the inflation-adjusted yield. That's important for America. Mark Gurman coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance.
headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures. The focus shifts to inflation data. Federal Reserve meeting on interest rates. Policymakers will announce their decision Wednesday, and their forecast to keep borrowing costs at 2-decade high. All right, we'll check in with futures. NASDAQ futures down about 0.2%, 40 points. Dow futures down 0.1%. Same for S&P futures that are down 0.1% or 8 points. The bond market, the 2-year yield 4.88%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.46%. That's up 2 basis points. What's moving the market? Southwest Airlines still up 7%. The Wall Street Journal reported Elliott Investment Management, they built an almost $2 billion stake in the carrier as plans to push for some changes. And Moderna, they're up about 1%. They said its combination flu and COVID shot will have met the goals of key late-stage trial. And finally, Krispy Kreme, they're up nearly 6%.
Whoa.
Big difference there.
I bought a lot of donuts, but not that many.
6% upgraded to buy from hold at Truist Securities. They said two things: investors undervaluing its partnership with McDonald's, and that the weight loss drug craze having an impact on the company, but Americans still like their sweets. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, go away. Paul, I've never flown Southwest Airlines.
Oh.
Ever. I don't know why.
Well,
I can't explain why.
Well, they're not. They
Because
only
it's a
recently have
plane
they
to
been in the
board
New York
it.
market.
Yeah, it's like this competitive whatever to board the plane because it's open boarding.
Oh, really? It's like
Yes.
Ryan Express.
Yes, it's crazy.
10-year track record up 1% per year with a dividend. I mean, it's basically a failed plan, and then Elliott's coming in.
Yeah, I tell you, the airline business I think is a brutal business.
Brutal,
the
but
economic
always
model
been.
just
Always been.
makes it
Yeah.
so difficult. I don't know why anybody gets into that business.
So yesterday, I'm out doing what I do. I'm on, Tony Street in New York with a cigar in my hand. I'm going back and forth with the team. We're blowing up the show. India, Modi.
Yep.
Macron, Scholz. Italy's doing okay. Belgium, the guy resigns. I remember interviewing him in Davos years ago. And I just said, get Terrence Haines. I don't care about anything else. Get Terry Haines with Pangaea. And he's here today about the ramifications, not for Europe, not for India, not for Belgium, but for Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump. Terry Haines, there's a message here. What should the Biden and Trump campaigns interpret forward to November?
Well, good morning, everybody. I think they ought to look at all these results very closely, including Mexico, South Africa, and the like.
Didn't mention that.
And Biden what Biden fundamentally needs to do is to actually double down on explaining, both his domestic policy and his foreign policy, not just in a pithy election way, but actually get to what the stakes are and why we need to be doing what we're doing. And this administration is bad at that. And I think, frankly, Trump's not much better at it. But they need to do that, not just because he's president and because he's running for re-election.
So, Terry, what we've seen in some of these elections and geopolitics around the globe over the past several weeks and months is the far right. I'm not sure if we can call them the far right anymore. Maybe they're more of the center of where folks are thinking about. But again, if you're President Biden here, you've got to be concerned about this, don't you?
Well, yeah, I think so. But what we're seeing here, I think, both in the United States and certainly in Europe. So the West as a whole is kind of a bonfire of the vanities moment. The politically entrenched don't seem to understand or really acknowledge their own roles in creating, over the last generation, policy and political cul-de-sacs that people are frustrated about. People want results, and we started to see that almost a decade ago with Trump, and we're seeing it again in Europe now. Whether or not the EU elections produce real change is arguable. The EU elections tend to be more of a protest vote than anything else, which is precisely why a lot of people are scratching their heads about Macron's desire to go ahead and hold a snap election.
Terry just nailed it, as Terry Haines always does, talking about cul-de-sacs of people and policy and society. Did George Herbert Walker Bush do that, or James Earl Carter of the other team? I don't think they did that.
I don't. So Terry, if you're former President Trump here, what's the play over the next several months? Is it staying with that playbook that worked for him last time? Is that still the playbook going forward?
That's the playbook he'll run that he thinks he needs to run, but he's in a much different situation, Paul, than he was in 2016 in three particulars. Firstly, he's not new anymore. He's not the new shiny big alternative that people are so frustrated about they were willing to take a flyer on. Secondly, he does not have a united Republican Party. He's got a split Republican Party. And if you don't believe me, watch how he's doing the dance with Nikki Haley to try to get her 20 to 40% of voters inside the tent. And thirdly, he's not winning independents. He's losing independents right now. So, he'll do what he does. And at the same time, they have to do different things in order to prevail, I think.
Terry, I think the heart of the matter, we're going to see this. Let's get out front, Terry, of all the op-edification in the evening news and the cable TV frenzy and all that. Ian Bremmer led with the inflation discussion off these elections and the harm to the middle class and lower class. Did we see a shift today where there's proof of concept that all that matters is immigration, migration, and green climate change? Did that shift happen over the weekend?
I don't think so, but the reason why, I think there's a shift happening, all right, but I don't think it's really those issues. Political people love to turn the dials and talk about issues, as if the right calibration of issues can help sell a candidate. This election to me is much more about what I call frame. First, and it's up to Biden to set the frame. The frame is Biden's got to show that from now until November, that he's up to the job every single day, and he's particularly in the June 27th debate. And he's also got to show that he's the calmer, kind of more centrist alternative. And as Trump, kind of blusters. If Trump had better messages, discipline, he'd probably do better. We can't count on that after a decade. I doubt he's going to start. But Biden needs to do those two things. And if he does that, I think he's got a united party and he's got a pretty good shot of getting most of the independents he needs.
Terry, should Tom and I and Lisa, should we pay attention to these conventions this summer?
Absolutely. You should not. Let me tell you what you shouldn't pay attention to right now. You should not pay attention to polls. The reason why is they're all registered voter polls. It's like talking about people who might go to the movies to see the show, as opposed to the people who will actually go. Guess which one Hollywood's interested in? The people that can actually get in, right? So same with polls. Right. But the conventions, but everything's going to get thrown up in the air after June 27th, because if Biden does badly, the convention all of a sudden gets a lot more interesting and fraught. If Trump does badly, maybe same for the R's.
I got time for one more question. Terry, judge within the history and the remembrance President Biden's trip not only to Normandy, to Paris to see Mr. Macron, and also out to Aunt Marne's cemetery, the World War I cemetery that we saw. Judge his performance.
I thought it was pretty much by the numbers, and that's a small compliment. I don't mean that to diss him. I think it was pretty much by the numbers. There's no magic there, but he showed. I think he showed at root that he, by and large, that he met my frame test. So he did okay.
Terry, hugely valuable. Thank you so much. First name we mentioned yesterday afternoon as the political world blew up. I'm reading Robert T. Kaplan on India, on the Indian Ocean, from Oman over to Indonesia. I guess when I'm done with that, I got to read about Europe because it's blowing up. Period.
Yeah, it's what we're seeing across much of the West, as Terry was just mentioning about this. You move to the right, and again, do you call it the minority anymore? The far right, isn't it? Maybe for a lot of places more centrist than people want to admit.
And you and I have failed, and I failed because we didn't even mention through the morning the protests around the White House this weekend of Palestine, Gaza, and Israel.
Yep.
And that's like beneath the headline radar.
No, Israel got 4 hostages back. Great news there, but at obviously a very huge high cost there. So it's, again, another very challenging part of the world.
We need to get the market open. We do that with futures at -10. The VIX up a stick, 13.17. In the next half hour, Mark Gurman, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how are the markets going to react? Key information coming out this week. Wednesday, the Labor Department's report on the cost of living. That comes out in the morning. And then you're followed by the Fed decision on interest rates later that afternoon. RBC said there's a risk of an 8% slump in the S&P 500 if the Fed fails to cut rates this year. We are open for business, so let's get right to it. We'll start with the S&P 500 right now, down about 0.1%, 10 points at 5,337. We'll get to the Dow, little change, down 17 points at 38,780. And the NASDAQ down 0.3%, or 53 points at 17,083. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.88%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%, and that's up 2 basis points. As we get to commodities, we want to check in with spot. Gold is higher at 2,303 an ounce. We have Brent crude $80 a barrel, WTI crude $76 a barrel. At the open, we want to check in with Apple. They're kicking off their Worldwide Developers Conference today. Right now, those shares are they're little changed. And we get to NVIDIA. It's 10-for-1 stock split goes into effect today.
Hey.
Right now, their shares down about 0.5% at $120. There you go. That is your Bloomberg Opening Bell report. Tom and Paul.
Remember the day of the Citigroup 10-for-1 reverse split?
Oh, yeah.
Every time I mention that to someone at Citigroup, they walk out of the studio.
Exactly. That was not a, yeah.
One of the great things Paul and I have in common, and from two different sides of the street and world, is where the mutual fund came from. There was a guy named George Putnam years ago who came up with a code, and Massachusetts Financial Service down Boylston Street got involved, and Mass Mutual and Loomis Sales and Dan Fuss. And the nexus of it, they all had great Red Sox tickets. Let's start with that.
Yep.
Was Boston, Massachusetts. And there's a lot going on there, but it's changed, Paul. I mean, you lived it. It's changed.
Yeah.
Big time.
Exactly.
Riding in herd there with the Hartford funds is Nanette Abuhoff-Jacobson, who has a wonderful heritage of what used to be a pleasant business, and it's become bruising. There's no other way to put it.
It has. And Nanette Abuhoff-Jacobson, Global Market Strategist for the Hartford Fund, joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Let me just start. I got to go way back. I'm just reading your bio here. So you get your computer science degree from Barnard College. There weren't computers then. What did you do?
Fortran, Paul, we called that.
Honestly, okay, you are dating me now.
But he's so rude. I mean,
no, okay, I will tell you the best story. I was in the computer room. You had to go to a central location.
Yep.
There were actual people were programming in COBOL, and they had cards, punch
cards.
cards.
And did you ever drop your cards on the floor?
No, but someone else did, and that got the biggest laugh.
Oh my goodness!
Computer center.
I got a gentleman's C because I dropped my cards.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were a hockey fan. Paul, let's start over with Nanette Jacobson.
And Nat, what do we do here? I mean, we've got an equity market that's kind of rallying. I mean, I've got yields. I got the 10-year Treasury at 4.46%. I guess I'll start with the Fed. What do you think our Federal Reserve is going to do, and how are you kind of positioning for that?
Yeah. So I think that the Fed is actually going to be, the meeting is going to be a big yawn.
Okay.
Because we've already, the big confusion is around the unemployment report. We've got cross currents, cross signals on inflation and slowing. The unemployment rate was up. Payrolls were up also. So mixed signals. And so I think the Fed is going to say exactly what it has been saying, which is we're going to be patient. We're not confident yet that inflation is coming down to 2%.
I want you to talk to the family arguments this weekend over rebalancing. We miss this market. We don't own NVIDIA. I mean, seriously, with your wonderful heritage here, don't give me the buy side. It's part of a carefully diversified portfolio. What do we actually do if we're long only buy side and we're shifting to ETFs or in ETFs and somebody in the kitchen table is saying buy BitDog? What's the strategy now to allocate for success?
Yeah, I mean, we're not discounting the incredible gains that the tech sector has made, the tripling in revenues and sales. But I do think that as the market has gotten narrower and narrower, now dominated by 3 or 4 stocks, 20% of the market, that you do have to think about some balance in your portfolio. And there are lots of good stories to support some of value: financials, energy, consumer discretionary. So I do think, when I talk to clients, I tell them, think about balance, think about rotating some of your exposure, which is so concentrated in tech, into some of these other sectors.
Do I get balance with fixed income? Because again, somebody can sit there in a 2-year treasury and get close to 5%.
Yeah, 5% ain't bad.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so we like fixed income also. We're in a market where even 10-year yields 4.5% look pretty fair value. Then you add 100 basis points for corporates, or a couple hundred basis points for high yield or more. Fixed income, looks pretty attractive, so long as the next move by the Fed, if you take them at face value, is a cut. And remember, they have only given 2 paths, and both those paths lead to cuts. There's no path to hikes at this point or over the next 12 months, in my view.
So does that mean I stay with U.S. markets? I don't need to necessarily look outside of the U.S.? How do you think about geographic exposure?
Yeah, I think balance can mean a lot of things. It can mean moving into some value areas, but I think it can also mean moving into Japanese and European equities. So,
see, now, at the beginning of our careers, we talked about Japan a lot. We haven't talked about Japan in 20 plus years. What happened to Japan that it's now back on the radar screen?
It was left for dead.
Yep.
And we've been talking about it for a couple of years now. And what's going on is that their corporate mentality has just done an about face.
Really?
You've got activists who want them to return more capital to shareholders. You've got the stock exchange that says you've got to earn higher ROEs. And so the whole face of Japanese stocks and the Japanese economy, not demographics, mind you, but the economy is doing better. And inflation for Japan is a good thing.
All right. How do you fold in the end of the Great Moderation? We had a gift of total return in bonds up in Boston, down Boylston, Dan Fuss at Loomis Sales, maybe leading the charge.
Legend.
Margie Patel and way back Felix Smith at Putnam. Fine. Those days are gone. What's the new Great Moderation look like? Are you clipping a coupon, or are you actually capturing total return?
Yeah, I think that dividends coupon in this environment is still a good strategy, and it cushions any sell-offs that you get in the equity markets. But I think the Great Moderation, may not be as moderate as we've seen in the past. You've got inflation that is percolating under the surface, and some of that I don't think is going to go away.
But to Paul's question on global stocks, are they going to give us use of cash like American stocks?
Right. I mean, U.S. stocks still is the innovation capital of the world. But when you look at some of the pharmaceutical companies, industrial companies, you've got great companies in Europe. And as I said, we're in a new phase for Japan. So, I'm telling clients, put some balance in your portfolio. And that means Europe, Japan, fixed income, and rotating a little bit out of tech into value.
All right, for better or worse, it's an election year here in the U.S. Do you put that into your calculus, or do you just kind of put it aside?
No, we do, and I think it's got, it's interesting. We talk about, what the election strategy is, but I think a lot of strategists and economists don't really want to talk about it because the environment is so polarized. But, there are 3 big things to pay attention to: taxes, trade, and spending. What do both candidates have in common? Spending.
Well, speaking of no strategy, what do the Red Sox do? The White Sox embarrassed them this weekend. Do the Red Sox have a strategy?
I'm just following basketball, Tom. Sorry.
Celtics, good time. They're up 2-0, Tom, in this, so they're looking good thanks to Duke's Jason Tatum.
Yeah, it's the Celtics are getting it done.
I know.
That's all there is to it.
Talk to us about Boston. How's the economy? How's our good friends up in Boston? Tom and I both spent a lot of our careers up in Boston. How's Boston these days?
Boston is great. Real estate's on fire. You've got the medical industry, biotech, finance. And it's a gorgeous spring day there, and
Yep.
here in New York too.
Very good.
Yep.
Nanette, thank you so much. And Nanette Jacobson, of course, with the Hartford Funds, our global market strategist. Right
Thank
now, the
you.
Dow, negative 96, up a stick on the VIX, 13.22. I don't know where Apple is. I suppose I should be responsible and give us an Apple quote here. Lisa should have been in my ear. You know, Tom, do an Apple quote.
Up 0.3%.
196.17. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. After a crushing defeat in the European Parliament elections, French President Emmanuel Macron is plunging his country into new political uncertainty. He's called a snap legislative election that pits him once again against his perennial far-right rival, Marine Le Pen. She spoke through an interpreter.
By giving more than 32% to the National Rally, the French have just given us their highest score. All parties combined in 40 years. It's a real emotion to see this beautiful popular force rising up throughout the country.
The unexpected move for snap elections gives Macron a final shot at defeating Le Pen before the 2027 presidential election, in which he cannot run because of term limits. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Cairo for his 8th round of Middle East shuttle diplomacy since the Israel-Hamas war began last October. He's pushing a ceasefire deal that President Biden has presented. Bloomberg's Laura Davidson has more from Washington.
Biden and his team are really scrambling to find any way to find some sort of result and progress towards a result in this war. At first it seemed like this would be a quick conflict. Now you have a lot of Israeli officials, prognosticating this could go on to the end of the year. Biden has realized that this is a big political issue for him, so he's looking now to try to find some way to wrap up, the worst of the fighting before the November election.
Bloomberg's Laura Davidson in Washington. Donald Trump is meeting today with probation officers for a sentencing interview after he was convicted in his hush money trial. Former President Trump will sit for the virtual meeting from his Mar-a-Lago estate. Yesterday, Trump held a rally in Las Vegas.
We're going to turn this country around. We're going to turn it around really fast. We're going to do the things that you've wanted to do. We're going to bring it back to 4 years ago and do even more.
Today, Trump is scheduled to address a Christian group that calls for abortion to be eradicated entirely. The former president will speak virtually at an event put on by the Danbury Institute, which is meeting in Indianapolis. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. It's that time of year, Paul, where I go to the Apple website.
Yep.
And they tell me college students, Mac and iPad go further.
Really?
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Apple Watch, smarter, brighter, mightier, Dad's wallet,
Not going
thinner.
Lisa's there with the whole crazy Apple Watch.
It's a whole juggernaut.
I'm not even sure if it tells time, but she's got it on. She's measuring every.
It tells me when to stand.
Look at this.
It does.
Trade in, I say. Get $170 to $630 in credit for all the iPods under your couch.
Oh, I got plenty of those.
It's there.
Yeah.
We're doing the product chat now, so we don't have to do it with Gurman.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the next thing you're buying at
I
the
need to
margin?
upgrade. I think I need to upgrade the phone. And you know when I need to upgrade the phone is when the battery tells you you need to upgrade
Mine's
the phone.
getting a little iffy.
I think I'm getting there.
Yeah.
There. So
It's a scandal. We're not-
Yeah.
You know,
So I'll call Tim
I
Cook,
was
see what
going
he
to
can do for me.
upgrade, and I still owed money on this beast. I didn't even know I did. And so I've waited, and I think I own this now.
Do you?
So then I can upgrade and
It's
get
not
a
a
trade-in
layaway?
on
Okay.
this. Vet Bill dropped this in the living room over the week. I mean, I about had a coronary because I can't break it.
Buy now, pay later. We'll see about that.
I mean, that's their whole racket,
I
right?
know.
They get you, and they get you on a monthly
Remember
plan.
back in the day when the phones were free? You know,
Yeah.
because they're subsidized by the carriers. What happened to that? That was a good
Buy
model.
now, pay forever.
Yeah.
Mark Gurman's going to come up. I mean, Gurman's like 28 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he was doing this when he was 10.
Exactly.
It's going to be it's a big deal. Gurman's out of bed.
I know.
We tried
Finally.
to get Ludlow.
He's out in L.A. Yep.
Right on the screen, down negative 71 here. The Standard & Poor's 53.35. It's Apple Day. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in stocks as the focus turns to the Federal Reserve policymakers updating their rates forecast for Wednesday and also the release of inflation data for May. So we have the NASDAQ down 0.3%, S&P 500 down 0.2%, the Dow down 0.1%. The two-year yield 4.88%. It's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.46%, and that's up 2 basis points. What's moving the markets? We'll turn to CrowdStrike, GoDaddy, KKR, all their shares on the rise. It was confirmed the stocks would join the S&P 500 index in the latest quarterly weighting change. So we have CrowdStrike right now up about 8%, GoDaddy at 2%, and KKR up 8%. Southwest Airlines, they're up nearly 8%. The Wall Street Journal reported Elliott Investment Management built an almost $2 billion stake in the company. And finally, some news about Meta. Their shares up about 0.3%, but the U.S. Supreme Court, it's agreed to consider killing a multi-billion-dollar investor data harvesting suit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul, what were you doing in 10th grade?
Oh, my goodness.
I was like listening to the Doors, trying to figure out how to be cool.
Yep, exactly.
Something like that. This is a story that I don't think is told enough. Mark Gurman has reinvented how we look at technology companies and report on them. And this started when he was in 10th grade, before he went to Michigan. Mark Gurman, what was it like in your bedroom secretly and clandestinely at 15 years old changing technology? What was that exactly like?
That's so funny. I really appreciate the kind words. I guess I wasn't really thinking about it that way at the time. But I guess in hindsight, the way we cover these companies to really try to have an in-depth understanding of what they're working on, why they're working on it, and the key players there. At least in the Apple side, I did try to, sort of pioneer that. Given the importance of the company.
It barely describes it. Mark Gurman with us now, chief correspondent for Apple and technology at Bloomberg News. Mark, at that time when you were with 9 to 5 Mac, the world was stunned with Eric Schmidt of Google stepping on the stage at the event. Is someone besides Taylor Swift going to step on the stage this morning with Mr. Cook?
Well, I think you're referring to Sam Altman and this big partnership they're going to be introducing with OpenAI. I anticipate Sam Altman to probably be there in the audience along with many others, but I don't anticipate him being in the event keynote itself on stage with Tim Cook. I think that this OpenAI partnership, while it's a huge positive for Apple, it's also a bit of an embarrassment for the company because that means they weren't able to get their own large language models up to snuff enough to do it on their own, necessitating the partnership, right? When you had a partnership with Google Search was a longtime key player, the very best in Google Search in search engines. AI is very nascent. It's very new. It's a very high-tech platform that they've developed here, and Apple is sort of on the outside the wheel there. And so bringing OpenAI in is a little bit of an embarrassment to Apple's internal technology. So I think having Sam Altman on that stage would just be, rubbing salt in those wounds.
So given that backdrop, Mark, what's a win today for Apple?
Good question.
Well, the win for Apple is that they put their own, arrogance aside, understood that this technology is important to consumers, and despite not having it ready, they haven't trashed it. They've gone in the opposite direction and decided we're going to do as much as we can, at least initially. So that's where this OpenAI partnership came from. It's sort of like when they struck the deal with Qualcomm to get 5G modems a few years ago. They weren't ready with their own 5G modem. They knew the 5G modems they were using from Intel at the time were terrible. They really didn't like Qualcomm. It was embarrassing to partner with Qualcomm, but they knew they had to do it if they wanted to release a phone that consumers would like and that the market was demanding. Same with this OpenAI partnership. They probably don't want to do it, but they know the market is demanding this advanced artificial intelligence set of capabilities, and so they've done it. And they're also going to have their own in-house large language models running on the phone itself and in the cloud. And that's going to power sort of less fancy AI, not generative AI, but things like summarizing meetings and notifications and automatically replying to your messages and sorting your emails on your behalf.
So, Mark, is there an expectation that at some point Apple will have its own generative AI capabilities?
I fully anticipate Apple to get to their own set of generative AI capabilities. It's not going to be this year, probably not going to be next year or the year after, but at some point they will need to move to their own set of generative AI capabilities. The question is this entirely a technology issue? I think the lack of technology is 90% of it, but there's that 10% factor there where generative AI and these chatbots, they still have what's called hallucinations, which is their fancy term for, or funny term, I guess, for giving wrong information.
I'll say.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you're able to blame OpenAI rather than yourself, that makes it a lot easier.
Right.
So you're going to see lots of mess ups and lots of issues from OpenAI's chatbot on the iPhone, right? But no one's going to blame Apple for it because everyone's going to know it's OpenAI.
Mark Gurman with us, Chief Correspondent, Apple and Technology, Bloomberg News. Okay, Gurman, it's time to get serious. Are they going to come on stage today so I know in September Lisa Mateo can finally organize her 87,000 photos on her iPhone? That's all anybody wants to know, Mark. How is AI going to help us with the photos we have on our phone?
Well, there's going to be a new feature where AI can automatically edit and enhance your photos. And starting next year, you'll be able to use Siri to edit your photos. There are going to be new AI features for organizing your photos into what are called memories, right? And albums and such, but I don't know if it's going to go far enough to appease, Lisa and some other iPhone users.
Well,
Lisa's
photos, a tough nut.
All right, so
yes.
Mark, obviously the
certainly
expectations
photos is going to get AI.
All right, so Mark, everything's focused on AI here. Is there anything else Apple wants to achieve today? Are we going to get a new this or that or watch or anything else?
Listen to you.
I'm not expecting, that's funny, I'm not expecting any new hardware devices or a new watch or anything like that.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a series of non-AI features coming as well. I'm going to give you a few of them. One, you're going to have a far more customizable home screen. So you iPhone users, including myself, who've long been jealous of their Android friends who have full customizability over their home screen, you'll be able to do that now too. Put icons anywhere, change the color of icons, theme your device. You're also going to have a new passwords app to compete with 1Password and LastPass to better manage your passwords. Yeah, I know, of course. And Siri is going to have an updated interface on the Apple Watch.
I got time, Mark. I got to interrupt, Mark. I got time for one more question, and it's so important for all of technology worldwide.
Please.
How do you do it, Mark Gurman, without giving away the crown jewels? How do you source Apple the way you do? What's the pixie dust?
Well, I'm just happy to do what I do, to talk about Apple. I think it's a very exciting company. I think they have some very interesting technology that impacts so many people. They have over 2 billion or 2.2 billion active devices. And so it's a really exciting field that a lot of people really understand intimately, right? I mean, we're talking about a phone that probably well over 75% of our listeners are using
Mark,
right now.
Are you doing yoga somewhere in Cupertino, getting all these secrets that you get every day? I can see Gurman doing yoga.
I think I'm doing yoga to dance around your question.
Mark Gurman, thank you so much. Don't be a stranger. Mark, pro tip, get up after Ed Ludlow. That's the best way to do it on the West Coast. Mark Gurman, getting ready for the Apple event this afternoon. Your question was great. Okay, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
It's just that simple.
It's interesting. I mean, I think the expectations, I think, are pretty measured for Apple because they're not known to be on the cutting edge necessarily of technology. They're, I think, best known for just perfecting technology and making it the consumer experience the best it can be. And that's kind of where do they need to be on the cutting edge of AI? Maybe not. But I think, as Mark was suggesting, folks like to see some big movement there.
Yeah, where's Gura? What's Gura doing?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, he's out there doing a big take story podcast.
Huge. He's getting ready for Lyle Lovett at Red Rocks.
Very good.
Very cool. Yep. Mr. Lovett, if I had a boat.
I'd sure not be single. I couldn't bring myself to marry an old dame. Will it just be me and Trevor We go riding through them movies, and we buy a boat and on the sea we sail.